The moment Daniel Carter looked up from his menu and saw his blind date walking toward table 8, his heart stopped. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some friend of a friend his sister had promised would be perfect for him. It was Victoria Langford, his CEO. The woman who signed his paychecks. The woman whose cold stare in quarterly meetings could silence entire departments. And judging by the way her face had gone pale, she was just as horrified as he was. What happens when a single dad gets set up on a blind date with the one woman he can't afford to mess things up with? When professional boundaries collide with unexpected chemistry? When one dinner changes everything? Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to the night that turned Daniel Carter's carefully ordered world completely upside down. 3 years of safety. Daniel Carter had built his life on a foundation of routine and reliability. At 34, he'd learned that predictability wasn't boring. It was survival. Every morning at 6:15, his alarm would go off. By 6:30, he'd have coffee brewing and his daughter Emma's lunch packed. By 7, they'd be at the breakfast table, Emma chattering about whatever 8-year-old drama awaited her at school, while Daniel mentally prepared for his day at Langford Global Solutions. He'd been a senior systems analyst there for 5 years, working in the IT infrastructure department on the 14th floor. It was good work, stable, well-paying, with benefits that covered Emma's braces and her weekend soccer league. After the divorce, after the custody battle, after rebuilding his entire life from the ground up, Daniel had learned to appreciate stable. Romance? That was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when Emma was his priority. Not when dating meant risking the delicate balance he'd fought so hard to achieve. But his sister Rachel didn't see it that way. "You're not a monk, Daniel," Rachel had said 2 weeks ago, cornering him at their mother's birthday dinner while Emma played with her cousins in the backyard. "You're a young man who deserves companionship. Emma deserves to see her father happy." "I am happy," Daniel had protested, though the words felt thin even to his own ears. Rachel had given him that look, the one she'd perfected as the older sibling, the one that said she could see right through his deflections. "When was the last time you went on a date?" Daniel had opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence had been answer enough. "That's what I thought." Rachel had pulled out her phone, scrolling through something with determined efficiency. "I have a friend, well, a colleague from the nonprofit board I'm on. She's smart, successful, and she's been through her own struggles. I think you two would really connect." "Rachel, one dinner, that's all I'm asking, just meet her. If there's no spark, fine, but at least try." Daniel had resisted, he'd argued, he'd made excuses. But Rachel was relentless, and somewhere in his chest, underneath all the carefully constructed walls, a small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had a point. So he'd agreed. One dinner. Friday night at Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown that Rachel had specifically chosen. She'd made the reservation, prepaid for the meal as a gift, and texted him the details with a string of encouraging emojis that made him feel like a teenager being set up for prom. Now, standing in front of his bedroom mirror on Friday evening, Daniel questioned every decision that had led him to this moment. The charcoal gray suit felt too formal. The navy one felt too casual. He settled on dark jeans and a blazer, professional but approachable. Emma had helped him pick out a shirt, holding up options with the serious concentration she usually reserved for her art projects. "The blue one, Daddy," she'd declared. "It makes your eyes look nice." "Since when do you know about fashion?" Daniel had asked, amused. "Aunt Rachel says presentation matters." Emma had grinned, gap-toothed and proud. Now, as Daniel adjusted his collar for the 3rd time, his phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "You've got this. Be yourself. She's going to love you." Daniel took a deep breath. Emma was already at Rachel's house for a sleepover with her cousins. A transparent setup to ensure Daniel had no excuse to cut the evening short. He grabbed his keys, gave himself one last look in the mirror, and headed out into the Chicago evening. The restaurant Meridian was exactly the kind of place Daniel would never choose for himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's skyline. Soft jazz played over hidden speakers. The lighting was dim and intimate, designed for romance and expensive conversations. The hostess greeted him with a professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Carter, table for 2 at 7:30. She checked her tablet, nodded, and gestured for him to follow. Right this way. Daniel's heart was already racing. This was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not some nervous teenager. But as the hostess led him deeper into the restaurant, past tables of couples leaning close over candlelight, past the quiet murmur of intimate conversation, he felt profoundly out of place. They stopped at table 8, tucked into a corner with a view of the city lights. "Your table, sir. Can I get you started with anything to drink while you wait?" "Just water for now, thanks." The hostess left and Daniel sat down, his back to the entrance. He pulled out his phone, more for something to do with his hands than any real need to check it. A message from Emma. A selfie of her and her cousins making silly faces, accompanied by, "Have fun, Daddy. Love you." He smiled despite his nerves and typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Be good for Aunt Rachel." 7:30 came and went. Daniel checked his watch, then his phone. No messages from Rachel or her mysterious friend. At 7:35, he started to wonder if he'd been stood up. Part of him felt relieved. He could text Rachel, say he'd given it a shot, and go home with his dignity intact. At 7:38, he heard the hostess's voice. "Right this way, Ms. Langford." Daniel's whole body went cold. Langford was a common enough name. It didn't have to be. He turned in his seat, and his world tilted sideways. Walking toward table 8, led by the same hostess who'd seated him, was Victoria Langford. She wore a black dress that was elegant without being overly formal, her dark hair pulled back in a style he'd only ever seen in boardrooms. Her expression was composed, professional, until she saw him. The color drained from her face. For one suspended moment, they simply stared at each other. Daniel's mind raced through impossible calculations. This couldn't be happening. Rachel's friend, the one she'd been so excited about, couldn't possibly be Mr. Carter. Victoria's voice was carefully neutral, but he caught the slight tremor underneath. "Ms. Langford." He stood automatically, some deeply ingrained sense of manners overriding his complete panic. The hostess looked between them, confused. "Do you two know each other?" "We work together," Victoria said. At the exact same moment, Daniel said, "She's my CEO." The hostess's eyebrows rose. "Oh, well, I'll give you two a moment to get settled." She retreated quickly, sensing the awkwardness radiating off them in waves. Victoria remained standing, her purse clutched in front of her like a shield. "I think there's been a mistake." "You think?" Daniel heard the edge in his own voice and tried to soften it. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean, this is just unexpected," Victoria finished. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, some of the shock had been replaced with calculation. "Rachel Carter is your sister." It wasn't a question. "Yes, and let me guess, you know her from some nonprofit board?" "The Chicago Youth Education Initiative." Victoria's jaw was tight. She never mentioned her brother worked at Langford Global. She probably thought she was being helpful. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he immediately regretted. He needed to appear calm, professional, not like a man whose carefully separated worlds had just collided with catastrophic force. Victoria glanced around the restaurant. Several nearby tables had noticed their awkward standoff. "We're making a scene." "We could leave," Daniel offered, though part of him dreaded the conversation that would follow with Rachel. Pretend this never happened. But Victoria was already calculating. He could see it in her eyes, the same look she got in meetings when presented with an unexpected problem. Rachel prepaid for this meal. If we leave now, she'll know something went wrong. She'll ask questions. And telling her the truth is complicated. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "I don't need the office gossip mill speculating about why I walked out of a dinner with an employee." The word employee stung more than Daniel wanted to admit. "So what do you suggest?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the city lights beyond the window. Then she looked back at him, decision made. "We stay. We have one professional, courteous dinner. We thank Rachel for her thoughtfulness. And then we never speak of this again." It was the most logical solution, the safest one. Daniel should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt a strange flutter of something he couldn't quite name as Victoria finally sat down across from him. The first 20 minutes. The waiter appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for the tension to settle. Good evening. Can I start you both with something to drink? Red wine, Victoria said. Cabernet, please. Whatever you recommend. Same, Daniel added, though he rarely drank wine and had no idea what a good Cabernet even tasted like. The waiter launched into an enthusiastic description of their wine selection. Victoria listened with polite attention, nodding at the appropriate moments. Daniel watched her, this woman he'd spent 5 years carefully avoiding. In the office, she was untouchable, a figure who existed on the executive floor, someone who appeared in quarterly meetings to deliver strategic updates with crisp efficiency. He'd been in exactly 3 one-on-one conversations with her in 5 years, each one brief and painfully formal. Now she sat across from him in the candlelight, and he could see details he'd never noticed before. The way she absently touched her earring when thinking, the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight imperfection in her otherwise perfect composure. The waiter departed with their wine order, leaving them alone with leather-bound menus and suffocating silence. Victoria opened her menu. Have you been here before? No, you? Once. For a business dinner. She scanned the options with the same focused attention she probably gave quarterly reports. The salmon is good. More silence. Daniel stared at his menu without really seeing it. Every word felt like navigating a minefield. Victoria spoke first. How long has Rachel been planning this? 2 weeks. She ambushed me at our mother's birthday party. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She cornered me at a board meeting, said she knew someone who would be perfect for me, someone who understood the challenges of single parenting and building a stable life. Daniel's eyebrows rose. You have a child? No. Victoria's expression shuddered slightly. But I've been the primary caretaker for my younger brother since our parents died. He's 19 now, in college. Rachel and I bonded over the experience of raising children that weren't technically our own. It was the most personal thing Victoria had ever shared with him. Daniel found himself leaning forward slightly. How old were you when? 22. He was 11. Victoria's fingers traced the edge of her menu. It was supposed to be temporary. I had law school plans, a whole different future mapped out. But life doesn't care about plans. Daniel knew that feeling intimately. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. Victoria met his eyes, and for a moment the CEO mask slipped entirely. But I wouldn't change it. Michael, my brother, he's the best thing in my life. I understand that. Daniel's voice was softer now. My daughter Emma, she's 8. After the divorce, fighting for custody, rebuilding everything from scratch, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But she makes every struggle worth it. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. The waiter returned with their wine and the spell broke. They ordered their meals, Victoria choosing the salmon after all, Daniel opting for steak, and retreated back into careful formality. But the silence felt different now, less hostile, more thoughtful. Victoria took a sip of her wine. Rachel spoke very highly of you. She said you were dedicated, intelligent, and one of the best fathers she'd ever known. She's biased, Daniel said, but he felt his face warm. She also said her friend was brilliant and compassionate. She failed to mention the friend was my boss. Would you have come if you'd known? Daniel considered lying, then decided against it. No, absolutely not. Neither would I. Victoria's smile was wry, which means Rachel is either remarkably naive or remarkably cunning. Knowing my sister, probably both. Victoria laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that Daniel found himself smiling too. This is surreal, Victoria said, shaking her head. 6 hours ago, I was reviewing your department's budget proposal. Daniel winced. And? And it needs work. The CEO voice returned crisp and analytical. Your team's resource allocation is inefficient. You're spending too much on legacy systems and not enough on cloud infrastructure modernization. Daniel felt his shoulders tense. Those legacy systems support critical business operations. We can't just tear them out and hope the cloud catches everything. I'm not suggesting you do, Victoria's tone sharpened. I'm suggesting you develop a strategic migration plan instead of clinging to outdated technology out of fear of change. It's not fear, it's risk management. We've seen what happens when companies rush into cloud migrations without proper planning. Downtime, data loss, security breaches, which is why I said strategic planning, not reckless abandonment. They stared at each other across the table, the easy warmth of moments ago evaporating into professional tension. This was familiar territory. The push and pull of disagreement, the careful dance of maintaining composure while defending positions. Daniel took a breath, forcing himself to step back. I'm sorry, we shouldn't be talking about work. Victoria set down her wine glass with deliberate care. You're right, my apologies. But the damage was done. The walls were back up, higher than before. Their meals arrived, and they ate in near silence. Daniel cut his steak into precise pieces, hyper-aware of every sound. The clink of silverware, the soft jazz playing overhead, the murmur of other diners who were probably having much better evenings. This was a disaster, the kind of disaster that would make Monday morning unbearably awkward. He could already imagine the knowing looks from colleagues if anyone found out. The whispered speculation, the careful distance Victoria would maintain to avoid any appearance of impropriety. He should never have agreed to this dinner. Daniel was planning his exit strategy, how quickly he could finish eating, how to politely but firmly end the evening. When Victoria spoke, "Do you volunteer anywhere?" The question caught him off guard. What? Rachel mentioned you volunteer. I was curious where. Daniel hesitated, unsure if this was genuine interest or just polite conversation. There's a community center in Pilsen. They run a tech literacy program for underprivileged kids every Saturday. I help set up computers, teach basic programming concepts. Emma comes with me sometimes. She likes helping the younger kids. He waited for the polite nod, the change of subject. Instead, Victoria's entire posture shifted. The Pilsen Community Tech Initiative? Yeah, you know it? Victoria's smile was different now, warmer, more genuine. I funded their last equipment upgrade, anonymously through a foundation grant. 20 new laptops, updated software licenses, networking equipment. They applied 6 months ago, and their proposal was exceptional. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. That was you? The foundation I chair, technically, but yes. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her earlier defensiveness gone. Their director, Mrs. Reyes, she wrote this incredibly compelling case about the digital divide and how it perpetuates educational inequality. The kids they serve, many of them don't have computer access at home. Without programs like that, they're already behind before they start school. Mrs. Reyes is amazing, Daniel said, his own excitement building. She founded the program 15 years ago in a church basement with 5 donated computers. Now they serve over 100 kids a month. And those laptops. He shook his head. You should have seen the kids' faces when we unboxed them. Brand new, top of the line. Some of those kids had never touched a new computer before. Did it make a difference? Huge difference. We've been able to expand our programming classes, start a basic web design course. There's this one girl, Maria, she's 10, brilliant, picks up coding concepts faster than I can teach them. She wants to be a software engineer. Before those new computers, she was sharing a 15-year-old desktop with 6 other kids in an overcrowded time slot. Victoria's eyes were bright. And now? Now she stays after program hours, working on her own projects. Last month, she built a website for her aunt's catering business. It's nothing fancy, but she did it herself. She's already talking about starting a tutoring program to teach other kids. That's exactly why I support these programs. Victoria's voice carried a passion Daniel had never heard in any board meeting. Education is the greatest equalizer we have, but it only works if kids actually have access to it. Programs like this, they're not charity. They're investment in potential. Daniel found himself nodding. Mrs. Reyes says the same thing. She calls it opening doors rather than giving handouts. These kids have the talent and drive. They just need the tools and opportunity. Does Emma enjoy helping out? The question brought a smile to Daniel's face. She loves it. She's not interested in the coding side. She's more of an artist, but she's great with the younger kids, helps them feel comfortable with the technology. Last week, she spent 2 hours teaching a shy 6-year-old how to use a drawing program. The kid ended up creating this amazing digital painting of her family. Emma sounds special. She is. Daniel's voice softened. She's been through a lot. The divorce wasn't easy on her, but she's resilient, empathetic. She sees helping other kids as a way to make their lives better, the same way I've tried to make hers better. Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You don't talk about your daughter at work. I try to keep professional and personal separate, Daniel admitted, especially after the divorce. I didn't want people seeing me as a struggling single dad, rather than a competent professional. I understand that. Victoria's voice was careful. I don't talk about Michael at work either. People make assumptions when you're young and in a leadership position. They question your judgment, your priorities. I learned early to keep boundaries. Is that lonely? The question slipped out before Daniel could stop it. Too personal, too direct. He braced for Victoria to shut down, to retreat behind her professional mask. Instead, she met his eyes. Sometimes. Yes. The honesty hit him harder than he expected, because he knew that loneliness. The careful separation of identities, the exhaustion of always maintaining the right image, the right distance. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That came out more intrusive than I intended. No? Victoria shook her head. It's a fair question, and honestly, I'm tired of pretending I have all the answers, that I've perfectly balanced everything. The truth is, I put Michael through college by sacrificing my own social life. I built a career by working twice as hard as anyone else to prove I deserved to be in the room. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to just exist as a person instead of a position. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. I know exactly what you mean. After the divorce, I became Daniel the single dad. Everything revolved around proving I could do it all, be the perfect father, the reliable employee, the guy who had his life together. I stopped being just Daniel. I'm not even sure who that person is anymore. Do you miss him? Every day? The admission felt like breathing after holding his breath for years. Emma deserves a dad who's present and stable, but sometimes I wonder who I would have been if I'd had the chance to figure that out. Victoria nodded slowly. Michael leaves for a semester abroad next month. It's his first time really being independent, and I'm terrified. Not because I don't trust him, he's more than capable, but because I don't know who I am when I'm not someone's caretaker. They sat with that confession between them, the weight of it somehow comforting rather than heavy. Around them, the restaurant hummed with other people's conversations, other people's lives. But at table 8, in the corner with the city lights, two people who'd spent years keeping walls up were finally letting them crack. The waiter appeared to clear their plates. Can I interest you both in dessert? We have an excellent chocolate mousse tonight, or perhaps coffee? Daniel glanced at Victoria, expecting her to decline, to remember that this was supposed to be a brief professional dinner they'd never speak of again. Instead, she smiled. The mousse sounds perfect. And coffee, decaf, please. Same for me, Daniel heard himself say. As the waiter departed, Victoria's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and her expression shifted. It's Rachel. She wants to know how the date is going. What are you going to tell her? Victoria's fingers hovered over her phone. Then she set it down, screen side down. I'll tell her later. Right now, I'm more interested in hearing about this web design course you're starting. Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. Only if you tell me more about the foundation. I'd love to know what other programs you support. Deal. The conversation flowed easier after that. They talked about education inequality, about Chicago neighborhoods they loved, about books they'd been meaning to read and movies they'd watched with their kids. Victoria shared stories about Michael's college applications, the terror and pride of watching him grow independent. Daniel talked about Emma's soccer games, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian who also painted on the side. Time became elastic. 1 hour turned into 2. The restaurant began to empty around them, early diners departing for evening plans. The waiter brought their dessert and coffee, then discreetly refilled their water glasses and left them alone. I have a confession, Victoria said, setting down her fork after finishing the mousse. I didn't think I'd enjoy tonight. Daniel laughed. That's not much of a confession. I'm pretty sure we both walked in here hoping for the floor to swallow us whole. True, but somewhere between the budget argument and the tech program discussion, I stopped counting the minutes until I could leave. Same. Daniel met her eyes across the candlelight. You're different than I expected. Different how? He chose his words carefully. In the office, you're formidable. Intimidating, if I'm being honest. I've spent 5 years trying to avoid being noticed by you because I assumed any attention would be criticism. Victoria's expression was wry. And now? Now I'm realizing that the person I was avoiding is someone I might actually like to know better. The words hung in the air between them. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and Daniel felt his heart kick up its pace. Had he just... Was that too much? They were sitting in a restaurant where his sister had set them up, where they'd agreed to have one dinner and pretend it never happened. But Victoria didn't look uncomfortable. She looked thoughtful. "This complicates things," she said finally. "Yeah." Daniel ran his hand through his hair again. "Yeah, it really does. I'm your CEO. You're my employee. There are policies, ethical considerations, power dynamics," Daniel added, "conflict of interest concerns, office gossip." "Exactly." Victoria twisted her napkin in her lap. "This can't happen. We both know that." "Right. Absolutely." They sat in silence, the weight of professional reality settling back over them. Everything Victoria had said was true. Everything Daniel had acknowledged was valid. This was a disaster waiting to happen, a complication neither of them could afford. So why did disappointment sit so heavily in his chest? The waiter appeared with the check, placed it discreetly on the table between them, and retreated. Victoria reached for it automatically, but Daniel was faster. "Let me," he said. "Rachel already paid for the meal, not the tip." Daniel pulled out his wallet. "Consider it my contribution to surviving the world's most awkward blind date setup." Victoria's laugh was surprised and genuine, when you put it that way. They walked out of the restaurant together into the cool Chicago night. The city was alive around them, cars passing on the street, couples walking hand in hand, the distant sound of music from a nearby bar. The air smelled like rain and concrete and possibility. Victoria's car was parked across the street, in a garage Daniel couldn't afford even if he wanted to. His was 3 blocks away, in a cheaper lot near the train station. This was where they should say goodnight, where they should retreat to their separate corners and pretend the evening had never happened. "Thank you," Victoria said, turning to face him on the sidewalk, "for not making this more awkward than it had to be. Thank you for staying, for giving it a chance. Rachel will be insufferable when she finds out we actually got along." Daniel smiled. "We could always tell her it was terrible, that we argued the whole time and left early." "We could." Victoria's expression was amused. "But she'd see right through us. She's terrifyingly perceptive." "Runs in the family," Daniel said, then immediately worried he'd overstepped. But Victoria just smiled. "Good night, Daniel." It was the first time she'd used his first name all evening. The sound of it in her voice did something strange to his equilibrium. "Good night, Victoria." He watched her cross the street, her heels clicking on the pavement. She glanced back once, just before disappearing into the parking garage. Their eyes met across the distance, and then she was gone. Daniel stood there for a long moment, processing the surreal evening. He should feel relieved that it was over. Instead, he felt oddly bereft. His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Well, how did it go?" Daniel stared at the message, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. A dozen responses ran through his mind, each one inadequate to capture the complexity of the evening. Finally, he typed, "You are never setting me up again. But thank you." It was interesting. Rachel's response was immediate. "Interesting good or interesting bad?" Daniel smiled despite himself. "Talk tomorrow. Emma's waiting for her goodnight call." He pocketed his phone and started walking toward his car. The Chicago night was beautiful, clear and cool, the kind of evening that made the city feel full of promise. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew Monday would bring complications, questions about boundaries and appropriate professional distance. The memory of Victoria's laugh and the way she'd looked at him in the candlelight when her guard was down. But that was Monday's problem. Tonight, Daniel Carter allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 3 years, the flutter of possibility. The dangerous, thrilling sense that maybe, just maybe, his carefully ordered life was about to get a lot more complicated. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to stop it. The drive home. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional swish of passing traffic. Daniel navigated the familiar streets on autopilot, his mind replaying the evening in fractured moments. Victoria's expression when she first saw him, shock giving way to calculation, giving way to something softer. The way she'd lean forward when he talked about Emma, genuine interest replacing polite attention. Her confession about loneliness, about not knowing who she was outside of being someone's caretaker. He'd seen his CEO tonight, but he'd also seen Victoria, the person behind the title, behind the quarterly reports and strategic decisions. And that person was someone he wanted to know better, which was exactly the problem. At a red light, Daniel pulled out his phone. No new messages from Rachel, thank goodness. But there was one from Emma, sent 20 minutes ago. "Good night, Daddy. Aunt Rachel says you're on a date. Is she nice? Do you like her?" Daniel's chest tightened. Emma rarely asked about his dating life, mostly because he didn't have one. The fact that she was asking now, that she'd been thinking about it, reminded him that his choices affected more than just himself. He typed back, "She's very nice, sweetheart, but it's complicated. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Sleep tight. Love you to the moon." The response was immediate. "Love you to the stars." The light turned green. Daniel put his phone away and drove, but Emma's question echoed in his mind. "Do you like her?" The answer should have been simple, should have been professional, should have been focused on all the reasons why pursuing anything with Victoria Langford was a spectacularly bad idea. Instead, all Daniel could think about was the way Victoria's eyes had lit up when she talked about the tech program, the passion in her voice when she discussed education equality, the vulnerability when she admitted to being lonely. Yes, he realized with sinking certainty, he liked her. More than he should, more than was wise. And that was going to make Monday morning very, very complicated. Monday morning arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train. Daniel had spent the weekend in a state of carefully managed avoidance. He'd thrown himself into Emma's soccer game on Saturday, cheering louder than necessary, focusing on her footwork and team spirit rather than the memory of Victoria's laugh. Sunday had been devoted to the tech program at Pilsen, where he'd helped Mrs. Reyes troubleshoot network issues and taught Maria advanced CSS techniques while determinedly not thinking about who had made those new computers possible. But now it was Monday, and there was no more hiding. He arrived at Langford Global Solutions at 7:45, earlier than usual. The 14th floor was still quiet, most of his team not due in until 8:30. Daniel made coffee in the break room, the familiar ritual grounding him. Black, 2 sugars. The same way he'd been drinking it for 5 years. His desk was exactly as he'd left it Friday afternoon, monitor dark, keyboard slightly askew, a stack of budget reports waiting for review. Daniel sat down, powered up his computer, and stared at the login screen. What was the protocol here? Did he pretend Friday night hadn't happened? Did he send a polite thank you email to Victoria, keeping it professional and distant? Did he... "Morning, Carter." Daniel looked up to find James Martinez leaning against the cubicle wall, coffee mug in hand and a knowing grin on his face. James was the lead network engineer, a friend as much as a colleague, and absolutely the last person Daniel wanted to talk to right now. "Morning," Daniel replied, keeping his tone neutral. "How was your weekend?" James asked with exaggerated casualness. "Do anything interesting?" "Soccer game, tech program, the usual." "Huh, that's funny." James took a sip of coffee, his grin widening. "Because Rachel posted something on social media about her successful matchmaking skills. Something about her brilliant brother finally giving dating a chance." Daniel's stomach dropped. "She didn't." "Oh, she absolutely did. Complete with a very mysterious caption about how the universe works in unexpected ways." James settled into the guest chair at Daniel's desk, clearly prepared to extract every detail. "So spill. Who's the mystery woman?" "It's nobody. It didn't work out." That's not what Rachel's post implied. "Rachel is delusional and overly optimistic," Daniel said firmly. "We had dinner. There was no chemistry. End of story." James studied him with the shrewd attention of someone who'd known him long enough to spot a lie. "You're a terrible liar. You know that?" "I'm not lying. I'm just not discussing my personal life at work." "Since when? You never shut up about Emma's soccer achievements." "That's different." "How?" "Because Emma was safe to talk about. Because his daughter's accomplishments didn't come with conflict of interest concerns or potential career implosion. Because he could be proud of Emma without worrying about crossing professional boundaries. Just drop it, James, please. Something in Daniel's voice must have conveyed genuine distress, because James's expression shifted from amused to concerned. Hey, you okay? If the date was that bad, it wasn't bad. That's the problem. The words escaped before Daniel could stop them. James's eyebrows rose. Okay, now you have to tell me. Who is this woman who's got you this twisted up? The elevator chimed at the far end of the floor. Daniel glanced over instinctively and felt his heart stop. Victoria Langford stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed executive authority. She carried her briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other, her attention focused on the screen as she walked toward the executive suite. She hadn't seen him. Wouldn't see him. The executive floor was 2 levels up, accessed by a private elevator. This was just a wrong button press, a momentary overlap of their usually separate worlds. But then Victoria looked up. Their eyes met across the open floor plan. For one suspended second, Daniel saw her mask slip, saw recognition, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. Then her professional composure slammed back into place. She gave him the smallest nod, the kind of acknowledgement a CEO might give any employee, and turned toward the executive elevator bank. James followed Daniel's gaze, then turned back with eyes gone wide. No way, tell me that's not— I have to get to work, Daniel said, standing abruptly. Those budget reports won't review themselves. Daniel Carter, if you don't tell me right now whether you went on a date with Victoria Langford, I swear I will— Conference room, 5 minutes. Daniel grabbed his laptop and coffee mug. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will personally ensure your workstation gets reassigned to the basement server room. James was already standing, practically vibrating with curiosity. 5 minutes. Conference room 3. I'll bring pastries. Daniel watched him go, then sank back into his chair. This was a disaster. If James had figured it out this quickly, how long before the rest of the office started connecting dots? Before the whispers started, the speculation, the careful scrutiny of every interaction between him and Victoria? His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. We should probably talk. My office, 9 a.m., VL. Daniel stared at the message. Victoria had his personal number, had taken the time to text him directly, used her initials like they were colleagues coordinating a meeting, except colleagues didn't usually have conversations about blind dates and loneliness over chocolate mousse. He typed back, I'll be there. The next hour crawled by in excruciating slow motion. Daniel sat through his promised conversation with James, who swore on his mother's lasagna recipe. Not to say anything while also providing an extremely unhelpful running commentary on all the ways this could go wrong. He responded to emails without reading them properly. He reviewed budget reports and retained exactly none of the information. At 8:55, Daniel took the elevator to the 16th floor. The executive suite was a different world, plush carpeting instead of industrial tile, original artwork on the walls, a reception area staffed by Victoria's assistant, Margaret, who looked up with a professional smile as Daniel approached. Mr. Carter, Miss Langford is expecting you. Margaret gestured toward the closed office door. Go right in. Daniel knocked twice, heard Victoria's come in, and stepped into her office for the first time in his 5 years at the company. It was larger than he'd expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Chicago. Victoria's desk was organized but not sterile. There were framed photos alongside the laptop and carefully stacked files. One showed a younger Victoria with a teenage boy who had to be Michael, both grinning at the camera. Another was a candid shot of the same boy in a graduation cap, pride evident in every line of his face. Victoria stood by the window, her back to the door. She turned as he entered, and Daniel saw the same uncertainty he'd felt all weekend written in her posture. Close the door, please. He did, his heart hammering. This was it. The conversation where they acknowledged Friday night had been a mistake, where they agreed to maintain professional distance, where they put this behind them and moved forward like rational adults. I've been thinking about Friday, Victoria began. So have I. It was— She paused, choosing words carefully. Unexpected, in many ways. Yeah. Daniel stayed near the door, unsure if he should sit or remain standing. Listen, If this is about maintaining professional boundaries, I completely understand. What happened was a fluke, and we can just... I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. The word stopped Daniel mid-sentence. What? Victoria moved away from the window, her arms crossed in a posture that might have looked defensive except for the vulnerability in her eyes. I spent all weekend trying to convince myself that Friday was an anomaly, that we got caught up in an unusual situation and shared more than we should have, that the smart, safe thing to do would be to maintain complete professional distance and never speak of it again. That sounds extremely reasonable. It does, doesn't it? Victoria's smile was wry. Except I can't stop thinking about our conversation, about the tech program, and your daughter, and the way you talked about building a life from nothing. I've had hundreds of professional meetings, Daniel, thousands of conversations with employees, but Friday night... She stopped, shook her head. Friday night felt different. Daniel's mouth was dry. Victoria, I'm your employee. You're my CEO. There are policies. I know, believe me, I know. She moved to her desk, not sitting but leaning against it, her hands gripping the edge. I've spent the entire weekend reviewing our company's ethics policies, conflict of interest guidelines, fraternization rules. I know exactly what the handbook says about relationships between executives and subordinates. And it's not prohibited. It's discouraged, strongly discouraged, but not explicitly forbidden. As long as there's no direct reporting relationship, as long as proper disclosure is made to HR, as long as neither party receives preferential treatment... Victoria stopped, seemed to gather herself. I'm not suggesting we ignore the complications, but I'm also not willing to dismiss the possibility of something meaningful because it's inconvenient. Daniel felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to see you again, outside of work, without the pressure of a set-up blind date or the shock of unexpected circumstances. Just to see if Friday night was real, or if we were both caught up in the moment. This could blow up in both our faces. It could, Victoria agreed. It could damage your career, mine too, if people think I'm showing favoritism. It could create office gossip, scrutiny, assumptions about our professional interactions. Emma, Daniel said quietly, if this goes wrong, it affects her too. She's already been through one major upheaval in her life. I won't put her through another one unless I'm certain. Victoria's expression softened. I wouldn't ask you to, and I won't pretend I have all the answers or that this isn't terrifying. But Daniel, I'm 41 years old. I've spent the last 19 years building a career and raising my brother and convincing myself that was enough. And maybe it should be. Maybe I should be satisfied with professional success and family responsibility. But you're not. No. The word was barely a whisper. I'm not. And when I sat across from you Friday night and felt that connection, that sense of being seen and understood, I realized how much I've been missing, how lonely I've been, even if I wouldn't admit it to myself. Daniel crossed the office, closing the distance between them. Not touching, not yet, but close enough to see the hope and fear warring in Victoria's eyes. I spent 3 years convincing myself that I didn't need anything beyond Emma and my job, that wanting more was selfish or risky, or just asking for trouble. And now? Now I'm standing in my CEO's office, having a conversation that could get us both fired, and all I can think about is how much I want to see you again. Victoria's breath caught. We'd have to be careful, discreet, at least at first. I know. No special treatment at work, no favoritism, no professional advantages. Agreed. If it becomes a problem, if it affects our work or creates ethical concerns, we stop. Immediately. Understood. Daniel studied her face, memorizing the way she looked in this moment, hopeful and scared and brave all at once. So what do we do now? Victoria glanced at her desk calendar, then back at him. Are you free Wednesday evening? There's a small jazz club in Hyde Park. Very low-key, not the kind of place we're likely to run into colleagues. I'd have to arrange childcare for Emma. Of course. If Wednesday doesn't work, Wednesday works, Daniel said quickly. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, she watches Emma sometimes. I can ask her. 7:30? 7:30. Daniel smiled, feeling something bright and terrifying unfurl in his chest. Should I pick you up, or... Let's meet there, just in case. Victoria returned his smile with one that was equal parts nervous and excited. The blue note. Do you know it? I'll find it. They stood there for a moment, the weight of what they'd just agreed to settling over them. Then Victoria straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place. You should probably go. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, and if Margaret sees you leaving looking this... She gestured vaguely at his face. This what? Happy. You look happy, Daniel, and that's going to raise questions. He felt heat creep up his neck. Right. Professional distance. I can do that. Can you? Victoria's tone was teasing now, some of the tension broken. Absolutely. You're just my CEO. I barely know you. Daniel moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For the record, I'm terrible at hiding my feelings, so this is going to be interesting. I have complete faith in your ability to maintain appropriate workplace decorum. You really shouldn't. Victoria laughed, and the sound followed Daniel out of her office, past Margaret's knowing look, and into the elevator. He pressed the button for the 14th floor and leaned against the wall, his heart still racing. What had he just agreed to? Secret dates with his CEO, careful navigation of workplace policies and office gossip, the risk of professional implosion and personal heartbreak. It was reckless and complicated and potentially disastrous, and he couldn't wait for Wednesday. The elevator doors opened onto the 14th floor, and Daniel stepped out to find James waiting with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that demanded immediate explanation. So? James thrust one of the coffees at him. How'd it go? How'd what go? Your mysterious morning meeting on the executive floor that you're trying very hard to pretend wasn't a big deal. Daniel took the coffee, buying time. It was a work thing, budget discussion. At 9 a.m. on a Monday? When budget reviews aren't scheduled until next week? James fell into step beside him. Try again. I hate you. You love me. I bring you coffee and listen to your problems. James lowered his voice as they passed Susan Kim's cubicle. So, are you seeing her again, or what? Daniel stopped walking. If I answer that, will you promise to keep your mouth shut? Cross my heart and hope to debug corrupted code for eternity. Wednesday night. Jazz club in Hyde Park. James's face split into a grin. Look at you, going full stealth romantic. Does this mean you're actually going through with this insane plan? What plan? We're just having coffee. In a jazz club. At night. After you both admitted there was chemistry. We didn't... Daniel stopped, because they absolutely had. It's complicated. No kidding. Dating your CEO is the definition of complicated. James's expression turned serious. But for what it's worth, I saw the way you looked at her this morning, and the way she looked back. Whatever this is, it's not nothing. That's what I'm afraid of. Hey, James clapped him on the shoulder. You're one of the most careful, responsible people I know. If you're willing to take this risk, there must be a good reason. Just be smart about it, okay? And maybe talk to HR before things get serious. Daniel nodded, grateful for the advice, even if the idea of talking to HR about dating Victoria Langford made his stomach twist. Thanks, man. Anytime. Now get to work before people start wondering why we're having intense whispered conversations in the hallway. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of meetings and code reviews, and carefully avoiding any situation that might put him in Victoria's orbit. Tuesday was more of the same, productive work interrupted by moments of distraction when he'd catch himself thinking about Wednesday night. What did one wear to a jazz club? Was this actually a date, or just 2 people exploring whether Friday had been a fluke? Should he tell Rachel what was happening, or would that jinx everything? By Wednesday evening, Daniel's nerves were strung tight enough to play a symphony. Emma was thrilled when he told her Mrs. Chen would be watching her. Is it another date with Aunt Rachel's friend? She asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Sort of, Daniel hedged, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. He'd settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, casual enough for a jazz club but nicer than his usual weekend wear. Do you like her, Daddy? There was that question again, the one that cut straight to the heart of everything. Daniel knelt down so he was eye level with his daughter. I do, sweetheart. But it's still really new, and I don't want to make any promises about what might happen. Is that okay? Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Aunt Rachel says you deserve to be happy. I am happy. I have you. But Daddy, You can have more than one thing that makes you happy, like how I'm happy with soccer and art class and helping at the tech program. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. I want you to find someone who makes you smile like you smile at my games. Daniel hugged her tight, his heart swelling. When did you get so wise? I'm 8. I know lots of stuff. Emma pulled back, grinning. Mrs. Chen says we can make cookies. Can we save you some? Definitely save me some. The drive to Hyde Park gave Daniel too much time to think. What if this was a mistake? What if the magic of Friday night had been situational, a product of unexpected circumstances rather than genuine connection? What if he'd built this up in his head and reality couldn't match it? The Blue Note was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, marked only by a small neon sign. Daniel parked 2 blocks away and walked, his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual, rather than like a man about to have a potentially life-changing second date with his CEO. The club was intimate, maybe 20 tables scattered around a small stage where a trio played soft jazz. Low lighting, exposed brick walls, the smell of coffee and whiskey. Victoria was already there, sitting at a corner table, and Daniel's breath caught when he saw her. She'd dressed down too, jeans, a dark blue blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She looked younger, softer, less like the woman who commanded boardrooms and more like the person he'd glimpsed Friday night. Victoria looked up as he approached, and her smile was nervous and genuine. Hi. Hi. Daniel slid into the chair across from her, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. Have you been here before? A few times. Michael dragged me here when he was going through his jazz phase sophomore year. Victoria gestured to the stage where the trio had shifted into a bluesy number. He said I needed to expand my cultural horizons beyond corporate reports. Smart kid. He has his moments. Victoria's fingers played with her water glass. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure you'd actually be here. Part of me wondered if Monday morning was wishful thinking. I've been wondering the same thing since Friday. Victoria met his eyes. Every time I tried to convince myself this was a bad idea, I'd remember something you said. The way you talked about Emma, or the tech program, or just the way you saw through all my carefully constructed walls. A waitress appeared and they ordered drinks, wine for Victoria, beer for Daniel. When she left, an awkward silence descended. This was different from Friday's forced proximity or Monday's office tension. This was them choosing to be here, and the weight of that choice sat heavy between them. I'm not very good at this, Daniel admitted. Dating, I mean. It's been 3 years since I've even tried. I'm not good at it either. I went on exactly 2 dates between raising Michael and building my career. Both were disasters that made me swear off the whole enterprise. What made you change your mind? Victoria was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Rachel, actually. A few months ago, she asked me what I'd do when Michael graduated, what my life would look like when I wasn't someone's guardian anymore. And I realized I didn't have an answer. My entire adult life has been defined by responsibility, to Michael, to the company, to proving I deserved the positions I'd earned. Somewhere in all of that, I forgot to actually live. I know that feeling, Daniel said softly. After the divorce, everything became about Emma, making sure she was okay, that she felt stable and loved, building a life that wouldn't fall apart if I made one wrong move. It was safer that way. But lonely. Yeah, really lonely. The waitress returned with their drinks. The jazz trio shifted into something slower, more intimate. Around them, other couples leaned close over candlelight, lost in their own conversations. The Blue Note felt like a bubble outside of time, separate from the office politics and professional complications waiting for them in the real world. Tell me about your week, Victoria said, and the simple request felt like an invitation to drop the careful pretense. So Daniel did. He talked about Emma's soccer game, how she'd scored her first goal of the season and practically floated home. About the tech program where Maria had shown him a responsive website design she'd built using YouTube tutorials. About James's relentless curiosity and the careful dance of avoiding office gossip. Victoria shared stories about Michael's latest email from his pre-semester trip to Europe, his excitement about studying abroad in Barcelona, about a tense board meeting where she'd had to defend a controversial acquisition, about the strange loneliness of coming home to an empty house after years of teenage energy filling the space. They ordered food, small plates they could share, picking at appetizers between stories. The conversation flowed like it had Friday night, easy and natural, punctuated by laughter and moments of comfortable silence. Daniel found himself leaning forward, drawn into Victoria's orbit, watching the way her eyes lit up when she got excited about a topic or the small gestures she made when choosing her words carefully. "I have a question," Victoria said as they finished their second round of drinks, "and you can tell me if it's too personal." After Friday's confessions? I think we're past worrying about too personal. Fair point. Victoria smiled, but there was nervousness underneath. Your ex-wife. Have you processed everything that happened there? I don't want to be a rebound or a way to avoid dealing with complicated feelings. The directness caught Daniel off guard, but he appreciated it. The divorce was 3 years ago. It was brutal and messy and took me a long time to work through. But I'm not carrying a torch for Jennifer, if that's what you're asking. Our marriage ended because we wanted fundamentally different things. She wanted freedom and spontaneity. I wanted stability and family. Neither of us was wrong. We just weren't right for each other. Do you still talk? Occasionally, she sends birthday cards to Emma, calls on major holidays. She's living in California now, working as a photographer. She's happy, as far as I can tell. And I'm happy for her, genuinely. But we're not friends, and we're never going to be. Victoria nodded, processing this. I appreciate you being honest. Your turn. Any ex-relationships I should know about? One serious relationship, back when Michael was 13. A lawyer I met through work. We dated for almost 2 years. Victoria's expression was carefully neutral. It ended when he gave me an ultimatum. Him or my responsibility to Michael. He said I'd never be able to fully commit to a relationship while I was still playing parent. Daniel felt anger spike in his chest. That's an incredibly unfair ask. I thought so too. Michael was my brother, my responsibility. I wasn't going to abandon him because my boyfriend couldn't handle sharing my attention. Victoria's voice was steady, but Daniel heard the old hurt underneath. After that, I stopped trying. Told myself it was better to focus on Michael and my career. That relationships were a complication I didn't need. Until Friday night, Victoria agreed, when I met someone who actually understood what it meant to build a life around someone else's needs, who didn't see that as a character flaw to be fixed. Their eyes met across the table, and Daniel felt that same pull he'd felt in the restaurant, the sense of recognition, of finding someone who understood the weight of choices made for love rather than convenience. I should probably tell you something, Daniel said, his heart picking up speed. I'm falling for you. Not the CEO version, the real you. The person who funds tech programs anonymously and worries about her brother and admits to being lonely. And that terrifies me because it's only been 2 dates and I have Emma to think about, and this could implode spectacularly, but I wanted you to know. Victoria's breath caught. For a moment she said nothing, just studied him with an intensity that made Daniel wonder if he'd miscalculated badly. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. I'm terrified too, she said quietly. I've spent 19 years being careful, being responsible, making the safe choice. And here you are, the most unsafe choice I could possibly make. And all I can think about is how much I want this. Want you. Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. So what do? We're careful. We're honest. We figure out how to navigate the professional complications while protecting what we're building personally. Victoria's thumb traced circles on his palm. And we see where this goes. The jazz trio finished their set to scattered applause. The Blue Note was fuller now, the late crowd arriving for the second show. Daniel and Victoria sat in their corner, hands linked across the table, and let the music wash over them. I should probably get home, Daniel said eventually, though he made no move to leave. Emma will want to tell me about her evening with Mrs. Chen, and I should prepare for tomorrow's executive meeting, Victoria smiled. But I don't want this to end. Neither do I. They walked out together into the cool Chicago night. The street was quieter than Friday had been, fewer people, less traffic. Victoria's car was parked right outside the club, a sleek black sedan that screamed executive. Daniel's was 2 blocks away. Thank you for tonight, Victoria said, turning to face him on the sidewalk. For taking a chance on this. Thank you for asking me to. They stood there, uncertain of the protocol. A handshake felt absurdly formal. A hug might be too casual. But then Victoria stepped closer, closing the distance between them, and Daniel felt his breath catch. "Is this okay?" she asked softly. In answer, Daniel cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But then Victoria's arms came around his neck and the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent. Daniel felt the world narrow to this moment, the taste of wine on her lips, the soft sound she made against his mouth, the way she fit perfectly against him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Okay," Victoria said shakily. "That was... yeah. We should... definitely." But neither moved. They stood there on the sidewalk outside the Blue Note, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air, while the jazz music drifted out into the night around them. "Friday?" Victoria whispered. "Dinner at my place? I'll cook." "You cook?" Passively. "I raised a teenage boy. I had to learn survival skills." Daniel smiled against her hair. "I'd like that." One more kiss, softer this time, and then Victoria was stepping back, putting necessary distance between them. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Victoria." He watched her drive away, then started walking toward his own car. His lips were still tingling. His heart was still racing. Somewhere in the rational part of his brain, warning bells were clanging about workplace ethics and professional boundaries and all the ways this could go wrong. But for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Carter felt fully alive, and he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The drive home felt surreal, like Daniel was floating several inches above his car seat. His phone buzzed at a red light. A text from Victoria. "I can still taste the coffee on your lips. Is that inappropriate to say?" Daniel smiled, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. He typed back, "Completely inappropriate. Also, I was thinking the exact same thing." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "This is going to be harder than I thought." "What is?" "Pretending tomorrow that I don't know exactly how you kiss." The light turned green. Daniel pocketed his phone, but the warmth of Victoria's words stayed with him all the way home. Mrs. Chen was reading on the couch when he came in, Emma asleep upstairs with cookie crumbs on her chin. "Good evening?" Mrs. Chen asked with a knowing smile. "Very good, actually. You look happy, Mr. Carter. It's nice to see." Daniel paid her, walked her to the door, then climbed the stairs to check on Emma. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm hanging off the edge. Her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. He tucked her in gently, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart." In his own room, Daniel lay awake for a long time, replaying the evening. The way Victoria had reached for his hand, the vulnerability in her voice when she admitted to being terrified, the kiss that had felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously. His phone buzzed again. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, me too. This is ridiculous. I have a 7 a.m. meeting, and all I can think about is Friday." "What are you cooking?" "That's classified information, but I promise it won't be pizza rolls in desperation, which is what I fed Michael most of college." Daniel laughed into the darkness. "Setting the bar high, I see. I'm nervous." "Is that silly? I run a multi-million-dollar company, but I'm nervous about cooking dinner for you." "I'm nervous too, but the good kind of nervous." "There's a good kind?" "The kind that means it matters." Several seconds passed before Victoria responded. "It does matter. More than I expected." They texted for another hour, the conversation ranging from silly to serious and back again. Victoria told him about her early days at the company, climbing from entry-level analyst to CEO through sheer determination and working hours that should have been illegal. Daniel shared stories about Emma's birth, the wonder and terror of becoming a father at 26. Finally, at nearly midnight, Victoria sent, "I should let you sleep." Sweet dreams, Daniel. Sweet dreams, Victoria. The next morning at work, maintaining professional distance proved exactly as difficult as Victoria had predicted. Daniel saw her twice, once in the elevator bank when he was heading to a meeting on the 12th floor, and again in the cafeteria during lunch. Both times, their eyes met for just a second too long. Both times, Daniel had to remind himself not to smile like a man with a secret. James noticed immediately. You're in a good mood. Can't a person just be happy? Sure. But this is the kind of happy that has a specific cause. James bit into his sandwich, eyes sharp. Wednesday night went well, I take it. Daniel focused on his own lunch, trying to keep his expression neutral. It was fine. Fine. You look like someone who just discovered the best-kept secret in Chicago. Your imagination is working overtime. My imagination is finely tuned to detect when my friend is lying through his teeth. James lowered his voice. Just be careful, okay? Whatever this is, it's clearly serious, and serious means complicated in your situation. Daniel knew James was right. The smart thing would be to slow down, to maintain careful distance until they'd figured out all the professional implications. But every time his phone buzzed with a message from Victoria, every time he remembered the way she'd kissed him outside the Blue Note, careful and slow felt impossible. Thursday brought its own complications. Daniel had a department meeting that Victoria attended, a quarterly review of IT infrastructure projects. She sat at the head of the conference table in full CEO mode, asking sharp questions and pushing back on timeline estimates. Daniel presented his team's progress on a major system upgrade, hyper-aware of her presence, trying desperately to focus on technical specifications instead of the memory of her lips against his. Mr. Carter, Victoria said when he finished his presentation, her tone crisp and professional. Your timeline shows a 3-month implementation phase. Can you justify that duration given the project scope? Daniel pulled up the relevant slide, forcing himself into pure technical mode. The 3 months accounts for staged rollout across departments, allowing us to catch and address issues before company-wide deployment. Rushing the timeline increases risk of system failures that could impact business operations. And if we allocated additional resources? Additional resources won't significantly compress the timeline. The bottleneck isn't manpower, it's the inherent complexity of integrating new systems with legacy infrastructure. Daniel clicked through supporting data. We're already operating at optimal efficiency given the technical constraints. Victoria studied the slides, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. Approved, but I want weekly progress updates, not monthly. Of course, Ms. Langford. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Daniel saw approval there, and something warmer underneath, pride maybe, or respect. Then Victoria moved on to the next agenda item, and the moment passed. After the meeting, James cornered him in the hallway. That was intense. It was a normal project review. Right. And the way she looked at you when you defended your timeline was totally normal CEO behavior. Daniel felt panic spike. What are you talking about? Relax. I only noticed because I was watching for it. To everyone else, it just looked like she was impressed with your technical competence. James paused. Which, to be fair, she should be. That was a solid presentation. Thanks. Daniel exhaled slowly. Is it that obvious? No. But I know you, and I know when you're trying really hard not to look at someone. James clapped him on the shoulder. Just be smart, that's all I'm saying. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Daniel spent the day in a state of controlled anticipation, going through the motions of work while his mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. He'd arranged for Emma to sleep over at Rachel's. His sister had been thrilled when he'd called, reading far too much into his request for childcare. So the mystery woman wants a second date? Rachel had asked with undisguised glee. Third, technically. Third! Daniel Carter, you've been holding out on me. When do I get to meet her? Let's see if we survive dinner first. At 5:30, Daniel left the office and drove home to shower and change. He'd asked Victoria what to bring, and she'd said just himself. But showing up empty-handed felt wrong. He stopped at a wine shop, spent 20 minutes asking the employee for recommendations, and settled on a bottle that was nice without being ostentatious. Victoria's address led him to a renovated brownstone in Lincoln Park, the kind of neighborhood where tree-lined streets and historic architecture commanded premium prices. Her unit was on the second floor, marked by a simple brass number plate and a small potted plant by the door. Daniel knocked, his heart hammering. Victoria opened the door in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she was so beautiful it physically hurt to look at her. "Hi," she said, her smile nervous and genuine. "Hi." Daniel held up the wine. "I know you said not to bring anything, but that's perfect. Come in." The apartment was warm and inviting, decorated in earth tones with comfortable furniture and bookshelves that lined entire walls. Family photos were scattered throughout. Michael, at various ages, Victoria and Michael together, a formal portrait of what must have been their parents. The space felt lived in, loved, nothing like the sterile executive image Victoria projected at work. "This is beautiful," Daniel said, taking it all in. "Thanks. I bought it when I made VP before the CEO position. Michael helped me pick it out. Said I needed a place that felt like home, not just a crash pad between work hours." Victoria took the wine, her fingers brushing his. He was right, as usual. "Make yourself comfortable. Dinner's almost ready." Daniel wandered to the bookshelf while Victoria disappeared into the kitchen. The collection was eclectic. Business strategy books mixed with classic literature, cookbooks next to memoirs, a whole section dedicated to what looked like Michael's old textbooks. On the middle shelf sat a small framed photo of teenage Victoria with an even younger Michael, both grinning at the camera, their faces bright with hope and determination. "That was taken the day I got my first promotion," Victoria said from the kitchen doorway. "Michael insisted we celebrate. He was 13 and already acting like my personal cheerleader. He looks happy." "He was. Is." Victoria's expression softened. "Raising him was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the best. He made me a better person." "Emma does the same for me," Daniel said quietly. "Some days I look at her and wonder how I got so lucky." Victoria moved back into the kitchen, and Daniel followed. The space was small but efficient, with pots simmering on the stove and a salad waiting on the counter. Whatever she was cooking smelled incredible: garlic and herbs, and something rich and savory. "Can I help with anything?" Daniel asked. "You can open that wine. Glasses are in the cabinet above the sink." They moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease, finding a rhythm that felt natural. Daniel poured wine while Victoria plated pasta. Homemade carbonara, she explained, one of the few dishes she'd actually mastered. They carried everything to the dining table, which Victoria had set with simple elegance. "This looks amazing," Daniel said, genuinely impressed. "Reserve judgment until you've tasted it. My carbonara has been known to range from restaurant quality to vaguely edible." But the food was delicious, and the conversation flowed even easier than it had at the Blue Note. They talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, college disasters, the strange experience of building adult lives around unexpected responsibilities. Victoria told him about the first time she'd had to sign Michael's permission slip for a field trip, the surreal realization that she was legally responsible for another human being at 22. Daniel shared the story of Emma's first soccer game, how he'd been more nervous than she was, terrified of somehow failing her. "Do you think about the future?" Victoria asked over dessert, store-bought tiramisu she'd arranged to look homemade. "Like, where you want to be in 5 years?" Daniel considered the question. 3 years ago, his answer would have been simple: stability, security, Emma happy and thriving. But now, sitting across from Victoria in her warm apartment, the future felt more complex and infinitely more interesting. "I want Emma to keep being the amazing kid she is," he said finally. "I want her to feel loved and supported no matter what she chooses. Beyond that," he paused, meeting Victoria's eyes, "I'm learning to leave room for possibilities I didn't plan for." Victoria's smile was soft. "I like that answer." "What about you? Where do you see yourself?" "Honestly, I don't know anymore. A year ago, I would have said CEO of a Fortune 500 company, board positions at 3 nonprofits, maybe a vacation house somewhere I'd never have time to visit." Victoria traced the rim of her wine glass. "But lately, I've been wondering if success is supposed to feel less lonely. If maybe I've been optimizing for the wrong variables. What would the right variables be? Connection, joy, someone to share the wins and losses with." Victoria reached across the table, taking his hand. "You're changing my equations, Daniel Carter." His heart stuttered. "Is that a good thing?" "I think so. It's terrifying, but good." They moved to the couch after dinner, sitting close but not touching, the air between them charged with possibility. Victoria told him about Michael's latest email from Barcelona, enthusiastic descriptions of architecture and tapas and the strange beauty of being completely out of his comfort zone. Daniel shared Emma's latest artwork, pulling up photos on his phone of her increasingly elaborate animal drawings. "She's talented," Victoria said, studying a watercolor of a fox. "Does she take classes?" "Art club at school, and I found a Saturday program at the community center. She lights up when she's creating something." "You're a good dad, Daniel. The way you talk about her, it's clear she knows she's loved." "I try. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together, but I try." Victoria turned to face him fully, tucking one leg under her. "Can I ask you something potentially awkward?" "After everything we've already discussed, I think we're past awkward." "Emma, when would you—" Victoria stopped, gathered herself. "I know we're still figuring this out and it's early, but she's a huge part of your life. Eventually, if this continues, she'd need to know about me, us. And I don't want to presume anything, but I also don't want to be a secret that complicates your relationship with her." The thoughtfulness of the question made Daniel's chest tight. "I've been thinking about that too. Emma knows I went on dates. She's actually been encouraging me to find someone nice, in her words. But I haven't told her specifics because I wanted to be sure this was real before bringing her into it." "That makes sense. But Victoria, you should know, Emma's approval matters. If we do this, if we keep seeing each other, she's part of the equation. And I can't promise she'll be immediately comfortable with the idea of her dad dating anyone, let alone someone who's such a big part of his work life." "I wouldn't expect her to be. When we get to that point, we take it slow. Let her set the pace. I remember what it was like when I started dating that lawyer, how weird it was for Michael to see me with someone else. Kids need time to adjust." Daniel studied her face, seeing the genuine care there. "You really have thought about this. I think about you constantly, which means thinking about all the parts of your life, including the most important one." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Rachel calling. "I should take this. Emma's at her place tonight." Victoria nodded, and Daniel stepped into the hallway. "Hey, Rach? Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Emma's asleep. I'm just calling to be nosy." Rachel's voice was bright with curiosity. "So where are you right now?" "That's none of your business." "You're at her place, aren't you? The mystery woman's apartment. I knew it." Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. "Rachel, I'm not judging. I'm thrilled. You deserve this, Daniel. You deserve to be happy and have adult companionship and all that good stuff." Rachel paused. "But also, when do I get to meet her? Because I'm dying here." "It's complicated." "Why? Is she married? A criminal? Does she have a second family in Wisconsin?" "No, nothing like that. It's just—" Daniel glanced back toward the apartment where Victoria was waiting. "I'll explain everything soon, I promise. But right now, can you please just trust that I'm handling this responsibly?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, "You really like her, don't you?" "Yeah," Daniel admitted. "I really do." "Then I'm happy for you, truly. Take your time, figure things out. But Daniel, don't let fear stop you from something good. You've been playing it safe for 3 years. Sometimes the best things in life require a little risk." After they hung up, Daniel stood in the hallway, his sister's words echoing in his mind. Sometimes the best things require a little risk. He'd been thinking exactly that since the moment Victoria had walked toward table 8 2 weeks ago. He walked back into the apartment to find Victoria clearing the dessert plates. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." Rachel being Rachel, equal parts supportive and impossibly nosy. Victoria smiled. "She cares about you. That's sweet. It's something." Daniel moved to help with the dishes, but Victoria caught his hand. "Leave them. Come here." She pulled him toward the couch, and Daniel went willingly, settling beside her with their legs touching. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "This is nice," Victoria murmured. "Yeah, it really is." They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the quiet. Outside, Chicago hummed with Friday night energy. Distant sirens, car horns, the low murmur of city life. But inside Victoria's apartment, the world felt small and safe and entirely theirs. "Daniel!" Victoria's voice was soft against his shoulder. "I know we said we'd be careful, that we'd navigate this professionally and make sure we didn't create problems at work." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Yeah?" Victoria lifted her head, meeting his eyes. I meant all of that. I still mean it, but I also need you to know this isn't casual for me. I'm not interested in something that stays hidden forever or exists only in secret. If we're doing this, I want it to be real. So do I, Daniel said without hesitation. I'm not interested in sneaking around indefinitely or compartmentalizing you into a box labeled inappropriate workplace relationship. You're more than that. This is more than that. Then we need to figure out next steps. Talk to HR, establish proper boundaries at work. Make sure we're not violating any policies that could hurt either of our careers. Agreed. Monday, I'll reach out to HR and ask about the disclosure process. See what the official protocol is for. Daniel gestured between them. Whatever this is. A relationship, Victoria said firmly. That's what this is. We can call it dating or seeing each other or whatever makes you comfortable, but Daniel, I need you to understand, I'm all in. Scared, yes. Aware of the complications, absolutely. But all in. The declaration hit Daniel square in the chest. Victoria was right. They'd been dancing around the word, using phrases like seeing where this goes and figuring things out to avoid the weight of commitment. But that wasn't honest. That wasn't fair to either of them. I'm all in too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been since Wednesday night, maybe even since that first dinner when you told me about funding the tech program. This is a relationship. You're my girlfriend, assuming that term doesn't sound ridiculously high school. Victoria laughed, her eyes bright. I haven't been anyone's girlfriend since law school, but I like how it sounds coming from you. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. Victoria Langford, brilliant CEO, an anonymous philanthropist, and the woman who makes me want to take risks. I've spent 3 years avoiding. Would you officially be my girlfriend? Yes, she whispered. Absolutely yes. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. Victoria's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Daniel lost himself in the taste of her, the feel of her, the absolute rightness of this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria pressed her forehead to his. Stay, please, just to talk, to be together. I'm not ready for you to leave yet. I'm not ready to leave either. They spent the next few hours tangled together on the couch, talking and kissing and simply existing in each other's presence. Victoria told him about her parents' death, a car accident when she was 22, sudden and senseless and devastating. How she'd gone from carefree college student to legal guardian overnight, inheriting not just a brother but a mortgage, bills, and responsibilities she'd never anticipated. Daniel shared his own story of loss. Not death, but divorce. The slow unraveling of his marriage, the custody battle that had drained him emotionally and financially, the guilt of feeling like he'd failed at the most important promise he'd ever made. You didn't fail, Victoria said fiercely. You recognized that staying in an unhappy marriage would have been worse for Emma than divorce. That takes courage. It doesn't always feel like courage. Sometimes it just feels like I couldn't make it work. Making it work isn't always the right answer. Sometimes the brave thing is knowing when to let go. Victoria's fingers traced patterns on his arm. You gave Emma stability and love. You built a life for her from scratch. That's not failure, Daniel. That's heroic. He kissed her again because he didn't have words for how much her understanding meant. They talked until nearly midnight, when Daniel finally forced himself to check the time. I should go, he said reluctantly. Let you get some sleep. I know, but I don't want to. Me neither. They stood at Victoria's door, prolonging the goodbye with one more kiss, then another. Finally, Daniel stepped into the hallway, turning back to memorize the sight of her, sleep-tousled and smiling, leaning against the doorframe in her socks. Text me when you get home? Victoria asked. Promise. And Victoria? Yeah. Thank you for tonight, for dinner, for the conversation, for all of it. Thank you for being here, for being you. Victoria's smile was soft. Sweet dreams, Daniel. Sweet dreams. The drive home felt different than Wednesday night had. Less surreal, more grounded. This was real. They were in a relationship, official, acknowledged, no longer just possibility, but actual commitment. The enormity of that should have terrified him. Instead, Daniel felt light, happy, more himself than he'd been in years. But that lightness lasted exactly until Monday morning when everything imploded. Daniel arrived at work at his usual time, planning to speak with HR before his day officially started. But the moment he stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor, he knew something was wrong. People were clustered in small groups, voices low and urgent. Susan from accounting looked up as he passed, her expression a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. James appeared at his elbow immediately. "We need to talk. Conference room, now." "What's going on?" "Just come on." The conference room door had barely closed before James started. "There's an audit. Corporate headquarters launched it over the weekend, completely unexpected. They're reviewing all departmental budgets, looking for discrepancies or irregularities." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Why? We just went through quarterly review." "Nobody knows, but Daniel, they're starting with IT infrastructure. Your department specifically." James's expression was grave. "HR called an emergency meeting this morning. They found something in your budget allocations, expenses that don't match up with approved projects." "That's impossible. I review every line item personally." "I know. But someone higher up flagged it, and now corporate is investigating." James hesitated. "There's more. People are talking. About you and Victoria." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Daniel's feet. "What are they saying?" "That you two have been seen together outside of work. That maybe the budget irregularities are connected. Special treatment, misallocation of funds. I don't know. It's all speculation right now, but Daniel, this looks really bad." Daniel's mind raced. The budget for his department was tight but clean. He'd been meticulous about documentation, proper approvals, appropriate spend. There couldn't be discrepancies unless someone had made an error, or worse, unless someone was sabotaging him. "I need to see the flagged expenses," Daniel said, forcing himself to think clearly. "Where's the audit team working?" "Conference room A on 12. But Daniel, maybe you should talk to a lawyer first. If they think you've been embezzling or accepting kickbacks, I haven't done anything wrong." But even as he said it, Daniel felt panic rising, because it didn't matter what he'd actually done. What mattered was what it looked like. And right now, it looked like an employee having a relationship with his CEO, while his department's budget showed suspicious activity. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and texted Victoria. "We have a problem. Can you call me?" The response was immediate. "An emergency meeting. What's wrong? Audit on my department. Budget discrepancies. People know about us." Three dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then, "My office. 30 minutes. Don't talk to anyone until then." Daniel showed the message to James. "I have to go." "Be careful, man. Whatever's happening, protect yourself first." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Daniel's life. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen without seeing it, while whispers swirled around him. Susan walked past his cubicle twice, her expression pitying. Mark from networking avoided eye contact entirely. They all thought he'd done something wrong, thought he'd used his relationship with Victoria for personal gain or professional advantage. The irony was crushing. They'd been so careful, so determined to maintain boundaries. And now, before they'd even had a chance to properly disclose the relationship to HR, everything was falling apart. At exactly 9:30, Daniel took the elevator to the 16th floor. Margaret waved him through with a tight smile, and Daniel knocked on Victoria's door. "Come in." Victoria stood by the window, her posture rigid, still in full CEO mode. But when she turned and saw Daniel's face, her expression cracked. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad. James says there are budget discrepancies in my department, expenses that don't match approved projects. And people are talking about us, saying maybe there's a connection." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "I was afraid of that. The audit came from our parent company. They flagged unusual expenditure patterns 3 months ago, well before we met. But the timing..." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Daniel, people will make assumptions about why I might have overlooked irregularities, about whether our relationship influenced budget decisions. But you didn't overlook anything, and I haven't misallocated a single dollar. I know that, and you know that, but we need to prove it." Victoria moved to her desk, pulling up files on her computer. "I've already started reviewing the flagged expenses. Most of them look like software licensing costs and hardware upgrades, all legitimate business expenses. But there's a pattern of approval timestamps that doesn't match standard procurement protocols. Daniel moved around the desk to look at the screen. The flagged line items were indeed from his department, but the timestamps were wrong. Approvals showing as processed at odd hours, midnight, 3 a.m., times when the procurement system should have been locked down for nightly maintenance. This is a system error, Daniel said, relief flooding through him. The procurement software we use, it's outdated, prone to timestamp glitches. I've reported the bug 3 times to IT services, but it was low priority because it didn't affect actual transactions, just the metadata. Can you prove that? I have email documentation. Trouble tickets going back 8 months. Daniel pulled out his phone, already searching his work email. Here, ticket filed in June about timestamp irregularities, another in September, and one in November specifically about procurement records showing impossible processing times. Victoria scanned the emails, her expression shifting from worried to calculating. This is good. This proves the discrepancies are system errors, not fraud. But Daniel, we still have a problem. The parent company already has concerns. And if they find out about our relationship in the middle of this investigation, they'll think I had help covering things up, that you knew about the errors and protected me instead of flagging them. Exactly. Victoria sank into her desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. We should have gone to HR immediately, should have disclosed everything before anyone could make assumptions. We were going to. Today was supposed to be... Daniel stopped, frustration and fear warring in his chest. This is my fault. I should have pushed harder to make things official sooner. It's not your fault. We made the decision together. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the worry. But we need to fix this, now, before the rumors solidify into accusations. How? Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she straightened, decision made. I'm going to the audit team myself. I'll present your documentation about the system errors, explain the timestamp glitches, and show them there's a clear technical explanation for the discrepancies. That should resolve the budget concerns. And us? We disclosed to HR immediately. Full transparency about the relationship, timeline, everything. We get ahead of the gossip before it becomes something worse. Daniel nodded, though his stomach was churning. What if they decide there's a conflict of interest? What if HR says we can't see each other? Victoria stood, moving around the desk to take his hands. Then we figure out what that means. Together. But Daniel, I'm not walking away from you because this got complicated. We knew there would be challenges. I just didn't think they'd come this fast. Neither did I. Victoria squeezed his hands. But we handle it. We're honest, we're transparent, and we trust that doing the right thing will matter. She was right. They both knew it. But as Daniel looked at Victoria's determined face, he couldn't shake the fear that honesty might not be enough, that the timing and optics of their relationship, combined with the audit, might create a perfect storm they couldn't weather. Okay, he said finally. We do this right. Full disclosure, complete transparency. Whatever happens, happens. Victoria pulled him into a fierce hug, and Daniel held on, trying to memorize the feeling of being certain. Because in a few hours, after they talked to HR and the audit team and faced whatever consequences came from falling in love at exactly the wrong moment, nothing might be certain ever again. They separated reluctantly, Victoria smoothing her suit jacket back into place, while Daniel tried to calm the racing of his heart. The plan was clear. Victoria would meet with the audit team while Daniel went to HR. Clean, professional, transparent, everything by the book. But as Daniel rode the elevator back down to 14, dread settled in his stomach like a stone. He could already imagine the conversation with HR, the carefully worded questions about when the relationship started, whether it had influenced any professional decisions, if there had been any impropriety. Even innocent answers would sound suspicious under the current circumstances. James was waiting at Daniel's desk, his expression grim. Legal just sent out a company-wide email. Everyone involved in the audit is being asked to preserve all communications and documentation. Daniel, they're treating this like a serious investigation. I know. Daniel logged into his computer, pulling up every email, every trouble ticket, every piece of documentation related to the procurement system errors. But I have proof the discrepancies are technical glitches, not fraud. Good. That's good. James lowered his voice. But man, people are really talking. Susan heard from someone in accounting who heard from someone in executive admin that you and Victoria have been seeing each other. The rumor mill is connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. Daniel's hand stilled on the keyboard. How bad is it? Bad enough that Mark asked me directly if you were getting special treatment, if your budget approvals were being fast-tracked because of personal connections. James's expression was pained. I told him he was full of it, but Daniel, you need to get ahead of this before it becomes the official narrative. I'm going to HR right now. Victoria and I are disclosing everything. That's smart. Just be careful what you say. Make sure they understand the timeline, that the relationship started after any budget decisions were made. Daniel nodded, gathering his documentation into a folder. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Audit team wants to meet with you at 11. Conference room A. I'll be there. He texted back. Going to HR now. Good luck. We'll get through this. The HR department was on the 10th floor, a suite of offices that always felt slightly intimidating with their neutral colors and carefully professional atmosphere. Daniel approached the reception desk, where a woman named Patricia looked up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hi, I need to speak with someone about a personal disclosure. It's somewhat urgent. Patricia's smile became more genuine, probably assuming this was about insurance or benefits. Let me see who's available. Have a seat. Daniel sat in one of the waiting area chairs, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Around him, the HR suite hummed with quiet activity, phones ringing softly, the murmur of conversations behind closed doors. Everything normal and professional, while his entire career potentially hung in the balance. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, a woman emerged from one of the offices. Catherine Wong, senior HR business partner, someone Daniel had met exactly once during his new hire orientation 5 years ago. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. Mr. Carter, I'm Catherine Wong. Patricia said you needed to discuss a personal disclosure. Yes, it's complicated. Is there somewhere private we could talk? Catherine's expression shifted slightly, picking up on his anxiety. Of course. This way. She led him to a small conference room and closed the door. Daniel sat down across from her, his folder of documentation clutched in his hands like a lifeline. Before we begin, Catherine said, pulling out a notepad, I want you to know that anything you share here is confidential unless it involves illegal activity or policy violations that require escalation. This is a safe space for honest conversation. Daniel took a breath. I'm in a relationship with Victoria Langford. We've been seeing each other for just over 2 weeks. We were planning to disclose today, but then the audit started and people started talking, and now I'm worried it looks like we were hiding something improper. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but Daniel saw her posture shift slightly. This was clearly not what she'd been expecting. I see. And you're disclosing now because of the audit? I'm disclosing now because it's the right thing to do. We should have done it sooner, would have done it sooner, but we wanted to make sure the relationship was serious before creating potential complications at work. Daniel set his folder on the table. But then the audit happened, and people started connecting the relationship to the budget discrepancies in my department, and I need you to understand that those things are completely separate. Walk me through the timeline, Catherine said, her pen poised over her notepad. When did the relationship begin? 2 weeks ago, Friday, Daniel calculated quickly. The 27th. We were set up on a blind date by my sister, who didn't tell either of us who the other person would be. We showed up, realized we worked together, and almost left, but we decided to stay and have one professional dinner. And then? Then we kept talking. We discovered we had a lot in common. We're both raising kids who aren't biologically ours. We both understand the weight of responsibility. We saw each other again on Wednesday and then Friday at her apartment. That's when we officially decided this was a relationship, not just casual dating. Catherine made notes, her expression still carefully blank. And during this time, did Ms. Langford make any professional decisions that benefited you or your department? No, absolutely not. She pushed back on my budget timeline in Thursday's quarterly review meeting, same as she would with any department head. There's been zero preferential treatment. What about the flagged expenses in your department? The ones the audit team is investigating? Daniel opened his folder, pulling out printed copies of his email trail. Those are system errors. The procurement software we use has a documented bug that causes timestamp irregularities. I've been reporting it for months. Here's the evidence. The expenses themselves are legitimate business costs, properly approved through normal channels. The timestamps just make it look like approvals happened at impossible times. Catherine studied the emails, her expression thoughtful. And you're saying this software issue predates your relationship with Ms. Langford? By months. The first trouble ticket is from June. We didn't meet until 2 weeks ago. So the audit investigation has nothing to do with your relationship, but people are making that connection because of the timing? Exactly. Daniel felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. I know how this looks. I know the optics are terrible. But Catherine, I haven't done anything wrong, and neither has Victoria. We fell for each other at possibly the worst possible moment, but we're trying to do everything right. Catherine set down her pen, studying him carefully. Mr. Carter, I appreciate your honesty, and I believe you're telling the truth about the timeline and the separation between your personal relationship and professional conduct. However, we do have policies about relationships between executives and employees, even when there's no direct reporting structure. Daniel's stomach dropped. What kind of policies? Disclosure is required, which you're doing now. Both parties must agree to avoid any situation where the relationship could create actual or perceived conflicts of interest. In practice, that usually means the employee in question reports to a different executive to avoid any appearance of favoritism. You mean I'd have to change departments? Or Ms. Langford would need to recuse herself from any decisions affecting your department. Either way, we need clear separation of professional oversight. Catherine's expression softened slightly. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but these policies exist to protect both employees and the company from exactly the kind of speculation you're facing now. Daniel nodded slowly, processing this. Changing departments would mean leaving his team, the projects he'd spent years building, the work he genuinely loved. But if it meant being with Victoria without the constant cloud of ethical concerns, maybe it was worth it. I understand, he said finally. What happens next? I'll document this conversation and discuss options with the VP of HR. We'll need to have a similar conversation with Ms. Langford to ensure both parties are in agreement about how to proceed. In the meantime, I'd advise you to be extremely careful about any professional interactions with her, especially while the audit is ongoing. We've been careful, Daniel said. We maintained distance at work, kept everything professional in meetings. The only reason people started talking is because someone saw us together outside the office. Unfortunately, that's all it takes sometimes. Catherine stood, signaling the meeting was over. I'll be in touch within 48 hours about next steps. And Mr. Carter? For what it's worth, I think you're handling this with integrity. That matters. Daniel left the HR suite feeling marginally better but still shaken. He'd done the right thing, been completely honest, but the path forward was murky. Changing departments, restructuring reporting relationships, navigating an audit while everyone whispered about his personal life. None of it was what he'd signed up for when he'd agreed to that blind date. His phone buzzed. How did it go? Victoria. Could have been worse. They want me to change departments or you to recuse yourself from decisions about my team. That's manageable. We can work with that. You sure? I'm sure. Meet me at conference room A at 11. We faced the audit team together. Daniel checked his watch. 10:40. 20 minutes to prepare himself for what would likely be the most stressful meeting of his professional life. He went back to his desk, gathered all his documentation about the software errors, and tried to ignore the way conversation stopped when he walked past. At 10:55, he took the elevator to the 12th floor. Conference room A was at the end of a long hallway, its glass walls currently obscured by closed blinds. Daniel could see shadows of people moving inside, hear the muted sound of voices. Victoria arrived moments later, her expression composed but her eyes tight with stress. She was carrying a laptop and a thick folder of her own documentation. Ready? She asked quietly. Not even a little bit. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. Me neither, but we're doing this together. They walked into the conference room side by side. 3 people sat at the table, Two Daniel didn't recognize, both wearing the slightly rumpled suits of corporate auditors who'd been working overtime, and one he did, Robert Chen, Chief Financial Officer and Victoria's direct report. Robert's expression was carefully neutral, but Daniel saw concern in his eyes. "Miss Langford, Mr. Carter," one of the auditors said, a woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair. "I'm Diane Morrison from the parent company's audit division. This is my colleague, Thomas Webb. I believe you know Mr. Chen." Victoria nodded, taking a seat with Daniel beside her. "Thank you for meeting with us on short notice. I understand you have concerns about budget irregularities in our IT infrastructure department." "We do," Diane said, opening a file folder thick with printed reports. "Over the past 6 months, we've identified multiple instances of procurement approvals processed outside standard business hours, expenses that seem to exceed departmental allocation limits, and a pattern of what appears to be expedited processing for IT-related purchases." "I can explain all of that," Daniel said, pulling out his documentation. "The timestamp irregularities are due to a known software bug in our procurement system. I've been reporting this issue to IT services since June. Here's the email trail. The system logs approvals with corrupted timestamps during nightly maintenance windows, making it appear that transactions were processed at midnight or 3 a.m. when they actually occurred during normal business hours." Thomas Webb took the emails, scanning them quickly. "These trouble tickets do indicate a recurring problem, but that doesn't explain why your department's expenses appear to exceed allocation limits." "Because the allocation limits in your report are based on our original annual budget," Victoria interjected smoothly. "In September, we approved a supplemental allocation for critical infrastructure upgrades after a security audit revealed vulnerabilities in our legacy systems. The board authorized an additional $200,000 specifically for Mr. Carter's department. That approval isn't reflected in the baseline budget figures you're working from." Diane's expression shifted. "We weren't provided with documentation about supplemental allocations." "That's an oversight on our part," Robert Chen said, speaking for the first time. "Supplemental allocations are tracked in a separate system from the primary budget database. We should have included that information in the audit materials." He pulled out his own laptop, accessing files. "Here's the board resolution authorizing the additional funds, along with the spend-down report showing how Mr. Carter's department utilized them." Daniel watched as the auditors reviewed the documentation, their skeptical expressions slowly transforming into understanding. The pieces were fitting together: software bugs, supplemental budgets, normal business processes that had looked suspicious when viewed without complete context. "What about the allegations of improper relationship influence?" Thomas asked, looking directly at Daniel. "We've received informal reports suggesting that you and Ms. Langford have a personal relationship that may have affected budget decisions." Daniel felt his face heat, but he met Thomas's gaze steadily. "Ms. Langford and I have been in a relationship for 2 weeks. Our first interaction was 15 days ago. All the budget decisions you're investigating were made months before we met. The relationship has nothing to do with any professional conduct." "We disclosed the relationship to HR this morning," Victoria added. "We're following all proper protocols for addressing potential conflicts of interest. But I want to be absolutely clear. I have never given Mr. Carter's department preferential treatment. I've pushed back on his budget requests, questioned his timelines, and held him to the same standards as every other department head." Diane studied them both for a long moment. "I appreciate the transparency. Based on this documentation, it appears the flagged irregularities have reasonable explanations: software errors and incomplete audit data rather than fraud or misappropriation." Relief flooded through Daniel so powerfully he felt lightheaded. "However," Diane continued, and Daniel's relief evaporated, "we'll need to verify the software bug claims with your IT services department and confirm the supplemental allocation through independent channels. Until that verification is complete, the investigation remains open." "How long will that take?" Victoria asked. 72 hours, assuming your IT team is responsive. In the meantime, Mr. Carter, I'd advise you to avoid any involvement in budget decisions or procurement approvals for your department. We need to ensure there's no appearance of ongoing irregularities." "Understood," Daniel said, though the restriction stung. His department, his team, his projects, all effectively taken out of his hands, while strangers verified what he already knew to be true. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of follow-up. As they filed out of the conference room, Robert Chen caught Victoria's arm. A word, Victoria? She glanced at Daniel, who nodded. I'll wait outside. Daniel stood in the hallway, close enough to hear the low murmur of conversation, but not the specific words. Through the conference room's glass wall, he could see Robert's concerned expression, Victoria's carefully composed responses. They spoke for perhaps 5 minutes before Victoria emerged, her face unreadable. Everything okay? Daniel asked as they walked toward the elevators. Robert wanted to make sure I understood the optics situation. He's worried about how this looks to the board, whether there's any perception that I've been compromised by the relationship. What did you tell him? That my professional judgment has never been influenced by personal relationships, and that I'm handling the disclosure process exactly as policy requires. Victoria's voice was steady, but Daniel heard the strain underneath. He's on our side, Daniel. He's just doing his job. They rode the elevator down in silence, hyper-aware of the other people sharing the space. When they reached the 14th floor, Daniel's floor, Victoria touched his arm briefly. I need to get back to work. But tonight, can we talk? Not here, somewhere private? My place? Emma's at Rachel's until tomorrow. 7 o'clock? I'll order dinner. Victoria nodded, and the elevator doors closed between them. Daniel stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle onto his shoulders. The investigation wasn't over. The gossip wouldn't stop. And even if everything was cleared up in 72 hours, the damage to both their reputations had already begun. James found him 10 minutes later, still sitting at his desk and staring at nothing. You look like you've been through a war, James observed. Feels like it. Daniel filled him in on the audit meeting, the HR conversation, the requirement for organizational separation. James listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. So basically, you have to prove you're innocent of something you didn't do, while also restructuring your entire professional relationship with Victoria, all while people gossip about whether you're sleeping your way to better budget approvals. That about sums it up. Man, I'm sorry. That's incredibly unfair. Yeah, well, life isn't fair. I learned that during the divorce. Daniel rubbed his eyes, exhausted despite it only being noon. The worst part is knowing that we did everything right, or tried to, and it still blew up in our faces. For what it's worth, I believe you. And I've been shutting down the gossip whenever I hear it. James hesitated. But Daniel, even if the audit clears you completely, people are going to talk. Dating your CEO, even with proper disclosure, that's going to follow you. I know. HR already said I'd need to change departments, or Victoria would need to recuse herself from decisions about my team. Daniel looked at James, his friend and colleague, for 5 years. If I transfer, I'd be leaving all this behind. The projects we've built, the team culture, everything I've worked for. Would it be worth it for her? Daniel thought about Victoria's laugh, the way she'd held his hand across the table at the Blue Note, her fierce declaration that she was all in. He thought about Emma's question, "Do you like her, Daddy?" And his own growing certainty that what he felt for Victoria was deeper than like, more substantial than simple attraction. Yeah, he said finally. It would be worth it. The rest of Monday crawled by in agonizing slowness. Daniel forced himself to focus on work, responding to emails and reviewing code, but his mind kept drifting to the investigation, to Victoria, to the impossible tangle they'd found themselves in. Twice he caught people whispering and looking in his direction. Once, Susan actually approached his desk with a sympathetic expression and asked if he was okay, which somehow felt worse than the gossip. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Daniel was wound so tight he felt like he might snap. He'd ordered Thai food, Victoria had mentioned liking pad Thai during one of their many conversations, and straightened his apartment 3 times, nervous energy demanding an outlet. Victoria arrived exactly on time, still in her work clothes, but with her hair down and exhaustion written in every line of her face. Daniel pulled her into a hug the moment the door closed, and she melted against him. Today was hell, she murmured into his shoulder, for both of us. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, finding comfort in physical closeness after a day of necessary professional distance. Finally, Victoria pulled back, managing a tired smile. Something smells good. Pad Thai and spring rolls, I figured we both needed comfort food. They ate at Daniel's small dining table. The conversation initially focused on anything but work. Emma's latest artwork, Michael's adventures in Barcelona, the merits of different Thai restaurants in Chicago. But eventually, inevitably, they circled back to the elephant in the room. HR called me this afternoon, Victoria said, setting down her fork. Catherine Wong wants to meet with me tomorrow to discuss options for managing the conflict of interest. What are you going to tell her? That I'm willing to recuse myself from any decisions affecting your department, that will establish clear protocols to ensure complete separation of professional and personal interests. Victoria met his eyes, and that I'm not ending this relationship because it's professionally inconvenient. Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. You could, end it. It would make everything simpler. Simpler isn't always better. Victoria reached across the table, taking his hand. Daniel, I told you I was all in. I meant it. One bad day doesn't change that. What if it's not just one bad day? What if the audit finds something else, or the gossip gets worse, or the board decides having a CEO in a relationship with an employee is too much of a liability? Then we deal with it together. Victoria's grip tightened. But I'm not running scared because things got complicated. I've spent 19 years making the safe choice, the careful choice. You're the first risk I've taken in all that time, and I'm not giving up on you this easily. Daniel brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. I don't deserve you. You absolutely do, and I don't deserve you, which means we're perfectly matched in our mutual unworthiness. Victoria's smile was soft. The audit will clear you. The documentation is solid, the explanations are reasonable. Once that's resolved, the gossip will die down. You sound very certain. I am certain, because I spent 3 hours this afternoon personally reviewing every single transaction in your department for the past year. Not just the flagged ones. Everything. And Daniel, your budget management is impeccable. There's not a single questionable expense, not one approval that seems inappropriate. You're exactly as honest and careful as I thought you were. The declaration hit Daniel harder than he'd expected. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, because I needed to be absolutely sure that my feelings for you weren't clouding my professional judgment, and now I am sure. Victoria's eyes were fierce. You're brilliant at your job. Your team respects you. Your budget management is a model for other departments. Dating you isn't a conflict of interest. It's one of the smartest decisions I've ever made. Daniel stood, moving around the table to pull Victoria into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest while he held her close. Thank you, he whispered into her hair, for believing in me, for fighting for this. Always, Victoria promised. We're in this together, remember? They moved to the couch, settling into familiar positions. Victoria curled against Daniel's side, his arm around her shoulders. The TV played softly in the background, some crime procedural neither of them was really watching. This felt normal, domestic, like a glimpse of what their life could be if they could just get through the current storm. Tell me something good, Victoria said after a while. Something that has nothing to do with audits or investigations or HR policies. Daniel thought for a moment. Emma wants to meet you. She's been asking about Daddy's friend and whether she's nice. Victoria lifted her head, surprise and something warmer in her expression. Really? Really? I told her it was still early, that we were taking things slow. But she's perceptive. She knows this is different from any other time I've dated, and she wants to know the person who's making me smile so much. What did you tell her about me? That you're smart and kind and care about helping kids through education programs. That you understand what it's like to build a life around someone else's needs. Daniel tucked a strand of hair behind Victoria's ear. I didn't tell her you're my CEO. That conversation can wait until we've figured out the professional complications. When? Victoria asked. When can I meet her? When things settle down, when the audit is resolved and we're not in crisis mode. I want Emma to meet you when we can focus on getting to know each other, not when we're both stressed about work. That makes sense. Victoria settled back against his shoulder. I'm nervous about meeting her. She's 8. You run a multi-million-dollar company. I think you can handle one curious kid. Running a company is easy compared to earning a child's approval, especially a child who means everything to the person you're falling in love with. The words hung in the air between them. Falling in love. Victoria had said it so casually, like it was a simple fact rather than a declaration that changed everything. Victoria, I know it's fast, she said quickly. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks, but Daniel, I can't pretend this is casual. Can't pretend I don't feel it happening. Daniel tilted her face up to his, searching her eyes. What he saw there was everything he'd been trying not to name, trying not to rush into, but denying it didn't make it less true. I'm falling in love with you too, he said softly. Have been since you told me about funding the tech program. Maybe even since that first disastrous dinner when you looked at me like you actually saw me, not just an employee. Victoria's smile was brilliant, transforming her tired face into something radiant. We're doing this all backwards, aren't we? Falling in love in the middle of a professional crisis. Seems to be our pattern. Nothing about us has been conventional. I wouldn't change it, Victoria said fiercely. Not the blind date disaster, not the complications, not even the audit. Because it led us here. Daniel kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. This was real. Whatever came next, department transfers, HR protocols, office gossip, they would face it together. And somehow, that made everything else manageable. They spent the rest of the evening tangled together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. Victoria shared stories about teaching Michael to drive, the terror and pride of watching him become independent. Daniel told her about Emma's first day of kindergarten, how he'd cried in the parking lot after dropping her off. At 11, Victoria reluctantly admitted she needed to go home, prepare for the next day's challenges. They stood at Daniel's door, prolonging the goodbye with kisses and whispered promises. We're going to be okay, Victoria said, her forehead pressed to his. Yeah, we are. I love you, she whispered. I know it's too soon to say it, but I do. Daniel's heart swelled. I love you too, and it's not too soon if it's true. He watched her drive away, then went back inside to his quiet apartment. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Night, night. Daddy, Rachel says you can tell me about your friend this weekend. Daniel smiled, typing back, can't wait, sweetheart, love you. As he got ready for bed, Daniel thought about the day. The stress of the audit, the relief of honest disclosure, the weight of professional complications. It had been one of the hardest days of his professional life, but it had also been the day he'd told Victoria he loved her. The day they'd faced their first real crisis together and come through it still standing, still committed, still believing in what they were building. Whatever came next, cleared audit results or continued investigation, smooth HR processes, or complicated restructuring, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't facing it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Tuesday morning arrived with rain hammering against Daniel's windows and a text from Victoria sent at 5:30 a.m. Couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about everything. Miss you already. Daniel had been awake since 5 himself, staring at the ceiling and running through worst-case scenarios. He texted back, Miss you too. Coffee before work? Can't. Meeting with Catherine at 7. But lunch? Somewhere off-site? Deal. The day started with an unexpected email from Diane Morrison. Daniel's hand shook slightly as he opened it, bracing for bad news. Instead, he found a concise message. IT services confirmed the procurement system bug. Software vendor has acknowledged the timestamp issue affects multiple clients. Reviewing supplemental budget documentation today. Will update by EOD. It wasn't a full clearance, but it was progress. Daniel forwarded the email to Victoria with a simple, good news, and got back a quick, very good news. One step closer. The office atmosphere felt different today. People still whispered, still glanced in his direction, but there was less hostility and more curiosity. James reported that someone in accounting had started a counter-rumor that the audit was finding nothing improper, that the whole investigation was based on technical errors rather than fraud. Public opinion is shifting, James said over morning coffee. People are starting to realize that maybe the gossip got ahead of the facts. Or they're just waiting for the official verdict before deciding whether to shun me or not. Always the optimist, James grinned. But seriously, I think you're through the worst of it. Once the audit clears you officially, the drama will move on to someone else's life. Daniel hoped he was right. He spent the morning working on documentation for projects he technically wasn't supposed to be managing, staying productive while carefully avoiding anything that could be construed as budget-related decision-making. It felt like being benched from his own team, frustrating and necessary in equal measure. At 11:45, his phone buzzed. Small Italian place 2 blocks north of the office. Giovanni's. Can you be there at noon? Daniel grabbed his jacket and left the building, grateful for the rain that gave him an excuse to walk quickly with his head down, avoiding potential conversations. Giovanni's was exactly the kind of neighborhood restaurant that catered to locals rather than business lunches. Small, family-run, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic bread perfuming the air. Victoria was already there, tucked into a corner booth with her back to the wall. She'd changed out of her usual suit into slacks and a simple blouse, clearly trying to look less CEO-like. Daniel slid into the booth across from her, and their hands found each other immediately under the table. "How was your meeting with Catherine?" he asked. "Productive. We discussed protocols for managing the conflict of interest. I'll recuse myself from any budget decisions affecting your department. You'll report to Robert Chen for performance reviews and promotion considerations, and we'll both be required to complete ethics training on workplace relationships." Victoria's thumb traced circles on his palm. "But Daniel, she was actually supportive. Said she respected how we were handling it." "That's better than I expected." "Me too. I think HR was prepared for us to be defensive or dismissive of the policies. Instead, we came in proactively disclosing and asking for guidance. That bought us goodwill." Victoria paused as a waitress appeared to take their orders. They both requested the lunch special, pasta and salad, and waited until she'd left before continuing. "I got an email from Diane Morrison this morning," Daniel said. "IT confirmed the software bug. They're reviewing the supplemental budget documentation today." Victoria's face lit up. "That's excellent news. If they verify the supplemental allocation, that should clear all the flagged discrepancies." Should being the key word. "I won't feel safe until I get official word that the investigation is closed." "I know, but we're close, Daniel. I can feel it." Victoria squeezed his hand. "And even if this had gone differently, if the audit had found actual problems or HR had said we couldn't see each other, I want you to know, I wouldn't have regretted choosing you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Even if it cost you professionally?" "Even then, because you're worth it. Us, it's worth the risk." Their food arrived, and they ate while talking about safer topics. Victoria shared that Michael had video called from Barcelona that morning, excitedly describing a flamenco show he'd attended. Daniel told her about Emma's latest obsession, marine biology, sparked by a documentary about octopuses. "She wants to visit the Shed Aquarium this weekend," Daniel said. "Asked me very specifically if we could go Saturday afternoon." Victoria's expression became carefully neutral. "That sounds fun." She also asked very specifically if my friend might want to come with us. Victoria's eyes widened. "Oh, yeah." Rachel apparently had a conversation with her about how Daddy deserves to be happy and how making new friends is a good thing. Daniel smiled wryly. "My sister is not subtle." "Do you want me to come? To meet Emma?" Daniel had been thinking about this since Emma's text the night before. Meeting Victoria felt like a huge step, bringing his two worlds together in a way that would make the relationship undeniably real. If things went wrong, if Emma didn't like Victoria or felt uncomfortable with the idea of her dad dating, it would complicate everything. But if things went right, if Emma and Victoria connected the way Daniel hoped they would, it would be magic. "I want you to come," he said finally, "but only if you're ready." Meeting an 8-year-old is intense, especially one who's been through as much change as Emma has. "I'm terrified," Victoria admitted, "but I want to meet her. Want to know the most important person in your life." "Saturday, then. 1 o'clock at the aquarium entrance?" "I'll be there." They finished lunch and walked back toward the office together, maintaining careful distance but stealing glances at each other like teenagers with a secret. At the building entrance, they separated, Victoria heading to the executive elevator, Daniel to his usual one. But just before the doors closed on his elevator, his phone buzzed. Counting the hours until Saturday. Already planning what to wear to impress an 8-year-old. Daniel smiled despite himself. "Be yourself." "That's impressive enough." The afternoon brought the news they'd been waiting for. At 3:15, Daniel's email pinged with a message from Diane Morrison marked High Importance. His heart hammered as he opened it. "Mr. Carter, after thorough review of all documentation provided, including verification of the procurement system software errors and confirmation of the September supplemental budget allocation, we have determined that all flagged expenditures in your department have reasonable business explanations. The timestamp irregularities are confirmed as system-generated errors rather than evidence of after-hours approval manipulation. The budget overages are accounted for by properly authorized supplemental allocations that were not included in our initial audit scope. We are closing the investigation with a finding of no impropriety. A formal report will be issued to executive leadership by end of day. We appreciate your cooperation and the thorough documentation you provided. Regards, Diane Morrison, Senior Auditor. Daniel read the email 3 times, making sure he wasn't misunderstanding. Then he forwarded it to Victoria with shaking hands. We're clear. Her response came within seconds. Come to my office. Now. Daniel practically ran to the elevator. Margaret waved him through with a genuine smile this time, and he knocked once before Victoria called for him to enter. She was standing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, Robert, I just saw the email. Excellent news. Let's schedule a brief call with the board tomorrow to update them on the resolution. She paused, listening. No, I don't think a formal announcement is necessary. A simple internal memo noting the investigation is closed should suffice. Another pause. Thank you. I appreciate your support through all of this. Victoria ended the call and turned to Daniel, her professional composure cracking into pure joy. We did it. You're cleared. We're cleared, Daniel corrected, moving toward her. Both of us. They stood in front of the window. The Chicago skyline spread out before them, and Daniel felt the weight of the past 2 weeks finally lift. The audit was over. The investigation closed. His reputation intact, and the woman he loved was smiling at him like he'd hung the moon. I'm going to kiss you, Victoria said, right here in my office with the blinds open where anyone could see. And I don't care who knows it. We should probably care at least a little bit. But Victoria was already pulling him close, and Daniel stopped caring about anything except the feel of her lips on his, the rightness of holding her, the certainty that they'd weathered the storm and come out stronger. A polite cough from the doorway broke them apart. Margaret stood there with an amused expression, holding a folder. The board memo for your signature, Ms. Langford. Also, congratulations on the audit resolution, and on the relationship, which apparently half the building knows about now. Victoria had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Thank you, Margaret, for both the memo and the discretion. Discretion is part of the job description. Margaret winked at Daniel. Though for the record, I told Patricia in HR 2 weeks ago that you two would end up together. The way you couldn't stop talking about that blind date setup was a dead giveaway. After Margaret left, Daniel and Victoria looked at each other and burst out laughing. So much for keeping things quiet, Victoria said. I think that ship sailed the moment we kissed outside the Blue Note. Daniel pulled her close again, this time just holding her. But I don't care. Let people know. Let them gossip. We did everything right, and we have nothing to hide. Except from Emma. For now. Until Saturday. Until Saturday, Daniel agreed. The rest of the week passed in a blur of returned normalcy. The gossip didn't disappear entirely, but it lost its sharp edge. People congratulated Daniel on the audit resolution, and if some of those congratulations came with knowing smiles about his relationship with Victoria, he could live with that. James started referring to Victoria as your girlfriend, the CEO, which was both embarrassing and oddly validating. Thursday brought official paperwork from HR, new reporting structures, ethics acknowledgement forms, protocols for managing potential conflicts. Daniel signed everything without hesitation, grateful that the path forward was clear even if it wasn't simple. Friday evening, Victoria came over for dinner. Emma was still at Rachel's, giving them one more night alone before the big introduction. They cooked together in Daniel's small kitchen, or rather Victoria attempted to help, while Daniel diplomatically steered her away from anything that could burn. I'm nervous about tomorrow, Victoria admitted over pasta. What if she doesn't like me? She'll like you. Emma's been asking about you all week. Rachel says she's planning her outfit like it's a royal audience. That doesn't help my nerves. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. Victoria, you raised your brother from age 11 to college. You run a company with hundreds of employees. You fund education programs and fight for underprivileged kids, and somehow still make time to learn terrible cooking skills. Emma is going to see all of that and think you're amazing. You really believe that? I know it, because I see it every day. They spent the evening curled up on the couch, Victoria quizzing Daniel about Emma's interests so she could find common ground. By the time Victoria left at 10, she seemed more confident, though Daniel could see the lingering anxiety in her eyes. Saturday morning, Daniel woke to Emma bouncing on his bed at 7 a.m., full of excited energy about the aquarium trip and meeting Daddy's friend. "Is she really your girlfriend?" Emma asked over breakfast, her eyes bright with curiosity. Daniel had been dreading this conversation, but Emma's directness made it easier. "Yeah, she is. Is that okay with you?" Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Aunt Rachel says you've been happy lately, like really happy. Is that because of her?" "Part of it, yeah." "Then I think it's okay." Emma took a bite of her cereal, then added, "But Daddy, if I don't like her, you don't have to keep dating her. I'm more important." Daniel's heart clenched. "You are absolutely more important. You're the most important person in my life, and that will never change. But sweetheart, I think you're going to really like Victoria. She cares about education and helping kids, and she wants to get to know you." "Victoria," Emma tested the name. "That's a pretty name. Is she pretty?" "She is, but more importantly, she's kind and smart and brave." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Okay, I'm going to wear my ocean dress, because we're going to see ocean animals." The drive to Shed Aquarium was filled with Emma's chatter about everything she wanted to see: the beluga whales, the penguins, the jellyfish exhibit. Daniel tried to focus on her excitement while his own nerves built. This was it, the moment where his two worlds collided for real. Victoria was waiting near the entrance, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, softer, less like a CEO, and more like someone who could blend seamlessly into Emma's world. When she saw them approaching, her smile was nervous but genuine. "Hi," she said, her eyes moving from Daniel to Emma. "You must be Emma. Your dad has told me so much about you." Emma studied Victoria with the frank assessment only children could pull off. "You're the one who gave money for the computers at the tech program." Victoria's eyebrows rose, clearly surprised Daniel had shared that information. "I am. Do you help out there sometimes?" "Every Saturday. I teach the little kids how to use drawing programs." Emma stepped closer, her initial shyness fading. "Daddy says you helped your brother go to college. That's cool." "Thank you. Michael's my favorite person in the world. Well, he was until he moved to Spain and started sending me pictures of food I can't eat." Victoria's self-deprecating humor made Emma giggle. "Can we see the penguins first?" Emma asked, already tugging on Daniel's hand. "They're my favorite." "Penguins it is," Victoria agreed, falling into step beside them. They spent the next 3 hours wandering through the aquarium's exhibits. Victoria proved to be surprisingly good with Emma, asking questions about her favorite animals and actually listening to the enthusiastic, detailed answers. She didn't try too hard or talk down to Emma, just engaged with her as a person worth knowing. At the beluga whale exhibit, Emma pressed her face against the glass while one of the massive white whales swam past. "They're so beautiful," she breathed. "They are," Victoria agreed, standing beside her. "Did you know belugas are called canaries of the sea because they make so many different sounds?" "Really? What kind of sounds?" "Clicks, whistles, chirps. They have a whole vocabulary. Scientists think they might use different sounds to talk to each other, like we use different words." Emma's eyes were wide. "That's so cool. Daddy, did you know that?" "I did not," Daniel admitted, smiling at Victoria over Emma's head. "Sounds like Victoria knows a lot about marine life." "Michael went through a phase where he wanted to be a marine biologist," Victoria explained. "I learned more about ocean animals than I ever expected to need." "Does he still want to be one?" Emma asked. "What?" "No, now he wants to study architecture, but I think it's good to be interested in lots of things. You never know what you might end up loving." They moved through the exhibits, Emma chattering away while Victoria listened with genuine interest. Daniel hung back slightly, watching the two most important people in his life connect. Emma was being herself, curious, bright, occasionally bossy about which exhibit to visit next, and Victoria was handling it beautifully, matching Emma's energy without overwhelming her. At the gift shop, Emma made a beeline for the stuffed animals. She spent 10 minutes deliberating between a penguin and an octopus before Victoria crouched down beside her. "That's a tough choice. What's your reasoning for each one? Well, penguins are really cute, but octopuses are super smart and can change colors and squeeze through tiny spaces. Emma looked up at Victoria seriously. Which one would you pick? Honestly? The octopus. Because smart and adaptable are better than just cute. But that's just my opinion. What matters is which one makes you happier. Emma considered this, then grabbed the octopus. You're right. Smart is better. Daniel watched this exchange with something warm and overwhelming swelling in his chest. Victoria wasn't trying to buy Emma's affection or impress her with grand gestures. She was just being real, treating Emma like her opinions mattered, engaging with her as a person. After the aquarium, they walked to a nearby pizza place Emma loved. Over pepperoni slices, Emma asked Victoria about Spain and Michael and what it was like to run a company. Victoria answered honestly, sharing stories that were age-appropriate but genuine. Do you have a boyfriend? Emma asked suddenly, and Daniel nearly choked on his soda. Victoria glanced at Daniel, a question in her eyes. He gave a small nod. Emma deserved honesty. I do, actually, Victoria said carefully. Someone who makes me really happy. Is it Daddy? Victoria smiled. Yes, it is. Is that okay with you? Emma was quiet for a moment, her pizza forgotten. Then she said, Daddy smiles more now. He used to smile at me, but now he smiles at other stuff too, like when he's looking at his phone or thinking about things. I make him smile? Yeah. And he makes you smile too, right? He definitely does. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then it's okay. But Victoria, if you're going to be Daddy's girlfriend, you should know some important rules. I'm listening, Victoria said seriously. Rule 1. Daddy always comes to my soccer games, even when it's raining. You can't make him miss them. I wouldn't dream of it. In fact, I'd like to come watch sometime if that's okay. Emma's face lit up. Really? Aunt Rachel and Grandma come, but more people cheering is always better. She held up a second finger. Rule 2. Daddy and me have pizza night every Friday. That's our special time. That sounds important. I respect special time. Rule 3. Emma paused, thinking hard. Rule 3 is you have to be nice to Daddy. He's the best dad in the world, and he deserves someone nice. Victoria's eyes grew suspiciously bright. Emma, I promise to be as nice to your dad as I possibly can. And you should know, he talks about you constantly. How smart you are, how talented, how proud he is of you. You're clearly the most important person in his life. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly. But he has room for other important people too. That's what Aunt Rachel says. After lunch, they walked Emma back to Daniel's car. She hugged Victoria goodbye with surprising enthusiasm. Thanks for coming to the aquarium with us. It was fun. Thank you for letting me come. I had a great time. Emma climbed into the back seat, already absorbed in playing with her new octopus toy. Daniel and Victoria stood by the car, a few feet of careful distance between them. That went well, Victoria said softly. Better than well. She loves you. I love her too. She's amazing, Daniel. Exactly as wonderful as you said. Daniel wanted to kiss her, to pull her close and tell her how much it meant that she'd connected with Emma so naturally. But they were in a public parking lot in the middle of the afternoon, and Emma was watching from the car. Dinner next week? He asked instead. All three of us? Maybe at my place so Emma can get used to having you around? I'd like that. Victoria glanced at the car where Emma was waving enthusiastically. She's waving at me. That's a good sign, right? That's an excellent sign. They said goodbye with nothing more than a warm smile, but Daniel felt like he was floating as he drove home. Emma chattered the whole way about beluga whales and octopuses and how Victoria knew so many cool facts. She didn't explicitly say she approved of the relationship, but she didn't need to. Her enthusiasm said everything. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel called Victoria. She asked me if you could come to her soccer game next Saturday, he said without preamble. Really? Victoria's delight was audible. What did you tell her? That I'd ask you. So I'm asking. Emma Carter's soccer game, next Saturday at 10 a.m. Recreational League. So the skill level is more enthusiasm than technique. There will be juice boxes and possibly a snack-shaming incident if another parent brings store-bought cookies instead of homemade. Victoria laughed. I'll be there. Should I bring snacks? Absolutely not. We're firmly in the store-bought cookie camp and proud of it. They talked for another hour, dissecting every moment of the aquarium visit. Victoria admitted she'd been terrified Emma would see through her nervousness, while Daniel confessed he'd spent the whole time watching them interact and falling even more in love. She gave me rules, Victoria said fondly, for dating her dad. It was the most adorable thing I've ever experienced. She takes her responsibilities as my protector very seriously. As she should. You're worth protecting. Victoria's voice grew softer. Daniel, today was perfect. Thank you for trusting me with her. Thank you for being exactly who you are, for not trying to win her over with grand gestures or pretending to be someone you're not. I learned a long time ago that kids see through artifice. The only way to connect with them is honestly. Sunday brought a family dinner at Rachel's house, which Daniel had been dreading all week. Rachel had been texting him constantly for updates about his mystery woman, and he knew the moment he walked through the door with Emma, the interrogation would begin. He was right. Rachel cornered him in the kitchen within 5 minutes of arrival. Okay, spill. Who is she? Where did you meet? And when do I get to meet her? Daniel took a breath. Her name is Victoria. We met on the blind date you set up. And you've actually already met her. She's on the nonprofit board with you. Rachel's eyes went wide. Wait, Victoria Langford? The one I set you up with? At Daniel's nod, she let out a whoop of delight. I knew it. I knew you two would be perfect together. But wait, isn't she your CEO? Yes, which has been complicated, but we're making it work. Complicated how? Daniel gave her the abbreviated version, the audit, the gossip, the HR protocols, Emma's introduction at the aquarium. Rachel listened with growing delight, occasionally interrupting with excited questions. So you're officially together? Like, in a relationship? We're officially together. And Rachel, before you ask, yes, you can meet her properly. Emma already gave her the stamp of approval. Emma met her before me? I'm her aunt. I set you up. And you'll meet her soon. But I needed to make sure Emma was comfortable first. Rachel hugged him fiercely. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this, Daniel. You deserve someone who makes you light up the way you do when you talk about her. The following week settled into a new rhythm. Victoria came to Emma's soccer game and cheered enthusiastically despite not understanding all the rules. Daniel and Emma had dinner at Victoria's apartment, where Emma fell in love with the extensive book collection, and Victoria impressed them both by making pasta that was actually edible. They went to the zoo, attended a children's theater production, and slowly built the foundation of something that felt like family. At work, things normalized too. The gossip faded as people found other topics to discuss. Daniel's department continued running smoothly under the new reporting structure, and if some colleagues gave him knowing smiles when Victoria passed his floor, it was good-natured rather than judgmental. 3 months after that disastrous blind date, Daniel found himself thinking about the future in concrete terms. Not just vague hopes about where things might go, but actual plans. Victoria had become part of his life in ways he couldn't imagine undoing. She attended Emma's school art show, brought coffee to Daniel's Saturday tech program sessions, video chatted with Michael about his semester abroad, while Emma sat on her lap asking questions. It was Victoria who suggested they plan a proper vacation together, the three of them. Emma voted enthusiastically for a beach trip, somewhere with tide pools and opportunities to see marine life in their natural habitat. They settled on a week in California during Emma's spring break, renting a small house near Monterey. The trip was everything Daniel had hoped for, and more. They spent days exploring tide pools, visiting the aquarium, building sandcastles. Emma collected shells and made friends with other kids on the beach, while Daniel and Victoria watched from their blanket, stealing kisses when Emma wasn't looking. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed exhausted from a day of swimming, Daniel and Victoria sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink. I could get used to this, Victoria said, her head on Daniel's shoulder. Beach vacations or family time? Both, all of it. Victoria lifted her head, meeting his eyes. I never thought I'd have this. A partner who understands my life, a child who feels like mine even though she's not. The sense of building something permanent. Daniel kissed her softly. I love you. Both of us do. I love you both too. So much it scares me sometimes. Scared in a good way? Scared in the best way. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in. Daniel thought about how far they'd come from that awkward blind date, through crisis and gossip and complicated professional dynamics, to arrive at this moment of perfect peace. 6 months after California, on a Saturday in early fall, Daniel brought Victoria back to Meridian, the same upscale restaurant where they'd first met, where they'd argued about budget allocations and discovered their unexpected connection. He'd reserved table 8, the corner table with the city view, the place where everything had started. Victoria looked beautiful in a deep blue dress, her hair down the way he loved, her eyes bright with curiosity about why he'd insisted on coming back here. "Nostalgia?" she asked as they sat down. "Something like that." They ordered wine, the same Cabernet the waiter had recommended that first night. Emma was at Rachel's, another sleepover arranged with suspiciously good timing. Victoria had mentioned Michael was video calling later, wanting to share news about his post-graduation plans. They talked through dinner about everything and nothing, Emma's upcoming school play where she'd been cast as a tree, Michael's job offers, Victoria's latest nonprofit initiative. The conversation flowed as easily as it had every day for the past months, comfortable and warm and full of the shorthand that came with truly knowing someone. When dessert arrived, the same chocolate mousse they'd shared on that first blind date, Daniel reached across the table for Victoria's hand. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we sat at this table?" Victoria smiled. "I said a lot of things, most of them defensive or awkward. You said we should have one professional dinner, thank Rachel for her thoughtfulness, and never speak of it again. Not my finest plan. I'm really glad we didn't follow through on it." Daniel took a breath, his heart racing. "Victoria, when I walked into this restaurant 9 months ago, I was terrified. I'd spent 3 years building a safe, predictable life, and the last thing I wanted was complications. But then I saw you, and every plan I'd made went out the window." "Daniel, let me finish, please." He squeezed her hand, drawing courage from her touch. "You challenged me that first night. You pushed back on my ideas, called me out on my resistance to change. You were intimidating and brilliant and completely different from anyone I'd ever met. And somewhere between the budget argument and the tech program discussion, I realized I didn't want safe anymore. I wanted you." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "These past 9 months have been the hardest and best of my life. We've navigated audits and office gossip and complicated family dynamics. We've built something real despite all the obstacles. And Victoria, you've become part of my family in a way I never expected. Emma asks for you when you're not around. She talks about when Victoria comes over, like it's the most natural thing in the world." "She's become part of my heart too," Victoria whispered. Daniel stood, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it. He moved around the table and knelt beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. "Victoria Langford, you told me once that you'd spent 19 years being careful, making the safe choice, optimizing for the wrong variables. You said I was changing your equations. Well, you changed mine too. You made me brave enough to take risks, to believe that love was worth the complications." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that had taken him weeks to choose. Nothing ostentatious, just elegant and perfect, like Victoria herself. "You're the person who funds education programs anonymously and fights for underprivileged kids. You're the woman who raised her brother with fierce dedication and built a career through sheer determination. You're the girlfriend who shows up to soccer games and learns marine biology facts to connect with an 8-year-old. You're everything I didn't know I needed, and I can't imagine my life without you." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you take on a single dad and his amazing daughter and all the beautiful chaos that comes with us?" Victoria was crying openly now, her hands shaking as she reached for his face. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. I love you so much, Daniel, both of you. You've given me a family I never thought I'd have." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was pulling him up, kissing him while tears streamed down both their faces. Around them, other diners were applauding, but Daniel barely noticed. All he could focus on was Victoria, her arms around his neck, her whispered, "I love you," against his lips. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Victoria held up her hand to admire the ring in the candlelight. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "I'm really not. but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to be perfect for you. Don't you dare. I fell in love with you exactly as you are, imperfect and brave and willing to take a chance on us. They sat back down, but Daniel couldn't stop touching her, holding her hand, memorizing this moment. The waiter brought champagne on the house, congratulating them with a warm smile. Other diners sent over well wishes, and Victoria laughed through happy tears, her ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. Should we call Emma? Victoria asked. Tell her the news? Actually, I already talked to her about it. Asked her permission to propose. Victoria's eyes widened. You did? Last week. I told her I wanted to ask you to marry us, but only if she was comfortable with that. Daniel smiled at the memory. She said, and I quote, "Duh, Daddy, Victoria's already family. Now we can make it official." She said that? Victoria pressed her hand to her heart. Daniel, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. She's been planning the wedding in her head for days. Fair warning, she has opinions about flower arrangements and whether we should have a chocolate fountain. We're definitely having a chocolate fountain if Emma wants one. They finished dessert in a haze of happiness, making plans and dreaming about the future. A small wedding, they agreed, just family and close friends. Michael would fly home from wherever his architecture career took him. Rachel would probably cry through the entire ceremony. Emma would be the flower girl, a role she'd already claimed according to Daniel. As they walked out of Meridian into the cool Chicago night, Daniel paused at the exact spot where they'd first kissed 9 months ago. The city was alive around them, but at this moment everything felt perfectly still. This is where it became real, he said, where we stopped pretending this was just a casual thing. Best decision we ever made. Victoria wrapped her arms around his waist, looking up at him with love written in every line of her face. Though I think it became real the moment you walked into this restaurant and I realized my blind date was you. Even though you were horrified? Especially because I was horrified. Because horror meant it mattered, meant the stakes were high from the very beginning. Daniel kissed her under the streetlights, surrounded by the city that had witnessed their entire journey. From blind date disaster to professional crisis to this moment of perfect certainty, they'd weathered every storm together. The wedding took place 4 months later in a small garden venue with 50 guests and unseasonably warm weather for February. Emma wore a lavender dress and took her flower girl duties extremely seriously, tossing petals with precision while Rachel sobbed in the front row. Michael stood as Victoria's best person, having flown in from his new job in Boston. James was Daniel's best man, cracking jokes about database schemas in his toast that made the tech program volunteers laugh and everyone else look confused. But the best moment came when the officiant asked if anyone had objections. Emma, standing beside Victoria in her official role as junior bridesmaid, raised her hand. The audience gasped. Daniel felt his heart stop. But Emma just turned to Victoria and said in her clear 8-year-old voice, "I don't have an objection. I just wanted to say welcome to our family officially. We love you." Victoria burst into tears, pulling Emma into a tight hug while the audience erupted in applause and laughter. Daniel watched his daughter and his wife-to-be holding each other and felt his own eyes well up. When they finally exchanged vows, promises to love and support each other, to build a life together, to face complications with honesty and humor, Daniel thought about how far they'd come. The single dad who'd tried to avoid risk had learned to embrace it. The CEO who'd optimized for the wrong variables had found her equation for happiness. Their first dance was to jazz music, a nod to the Blue Note where they'd had their second date. Emma cut in halfway through, insisting on dancing with both of them. They swayed together under string lights while their family and friends watched. 3 people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from unexpected circumstances. Later, as the reception wound down and Emma dozed on Rachel's shoulder, Victoria and Daniel stood at the edge of the garden watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd left that first dinner?" Victoria asked. "If we'd walked away and pretended we'd never met?" "All the time. And I thank whatever cosmic force made us stay." Rachel. The cosmic force was Rachel and her meddling. Victoria laughed, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Remind me to send her a very expensive thank you gift. She'll lord this over us for the rest of our lives." "Worth it." Victoria looked up at him, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Daniel Carter, I love you. I love our weird, complicated, perfect life. I love that we turned a disaster into a love story. Victoria Carter, Daniel tested her new name, grinning at her delighted expression. I love you too, and I promise to keep taking risks with you for the rest of our lives. They kissed as the sun set, surrounded by the people who mattered most, celebrating the beautiful chaos they'd built together. Emma would later claim she saw the whole thing coming from that first aquarium visit. Michael would joke that he'd known the moment Daniel's name came up in conversation with his sister. Rachel would insist she'd orchestrated the entire thing through divine matchmaking intuition. But Daniel and Victoria knew the truth. Sometimes, the best things in life come from the risks you're most afraid to take. From blind dates you almost cancel, from relationships that seem impossible, from choosing love even when the path forward is complicated. 1 year later, they would stand in that same garden for Emma's 9th birthday party, watching her show Michael's girlfriend the octopus painting Victoria had commissioned from a local artist. 2 years later, they'd announce Victoria's pregnancy. Emma's excitement about becoming a big sister radiating through every proud proclamation. 5 years later, Emma would give a speech at the tech program's anniversary gala about how her dad and Victoria had taught her that family was about showing up, supporting each other, and being brave enough to love completely. But for now, in this perfect moment as husband and wife, they simply held each other and watched the stars emerge over Chicago. The city that had witnessed their entire journey, from that disastrous blind date at Table 8 to this celebration of forever, sparkled with possibility. And Daniel Carter, the man who'd spent 3 years playing it safe, couldn't imagine anything more perfect than the beautiful, complicated, absolutely worthwhile risk of loving Victoria Langford with his whole heart.